And indeed, also from our side, the regulatory standards are not changed. So the same standard in terms of safety, quality, and efficacy that would normally apply to any other vaccine will be applicable here for COVID-19. Next slide. And as said, here what we're seeing is just really a compression in time of all the activities with respect to what normally happens, but really no decrease in the amount of evidence generated. Next slide. This has been possible because there has been an incredible effort by all the players and the stakeholders to mobilize resources simultaneously and make sure by a number of agreements and collaboration to make sure that this vaccine could advance very rapidly, and also that they have sufficient fund to make sure that all these activities are carried on in really a very short time frame. Next slide. From the EMA perspective, we made also a contribution in this sense and really foster how rapidly this vaccine could have been advanced. And this has been done essentially by establishing the EMA COVID-19 task force according to our ELFREC plan, which is a group composed by EMA staff and experts from the regulatory network in the area of vaccines and infectious diseases, and with other expertise as well, that has helped in having a continuous and rapid dialogue with the developer so that we could provide feedback in a way that normally is not done in a continuous fashion, and also giving rapid scientific advice that has been instrumental in directing developers very rapidly on what would be the requirement from a regulatory point of view. Next slide. The other very important peculiarity that has happened here with COVID-19 is that manufacturers and sponsors have decided to start scaling up the manufacturing much before they were aware of whether their vaccine is successful in large clinical trial. So in other words, starting scaling up at risk. This can be extremely important in making sure that once the vaccines are approved, there will be sufficient amount to be deployed in order to have an impact on the pandemic in the fastest possible way. Next slide. The last point I want to cover here is which vaccines for COVID-19 are currently under assessment for approval by the EMA. And I have to say that we got 4 vaccines that officially started rolling review and 2 also submitted officially for conditional marketing authorization. 2 are messenger RNA vaccine that contain genetic instruction in the form of messenger RNA for making an immune response against the SARS-CoV-2. One is from Pfizer-BioNTech and the other one from Moderna. Then we have 2 viral vector vaccine which use this modified and harmless adenovirus, human adenovirus or chimpanzee adenovirus. And these viruses, they carry the genetic instruction for making an immune response against the SARS-CoV-2 as well. This vaccine could advance very rapidly for a number of reasons. Of course, this technology might be more prone for rapidly advancing them in the early phases of development. And they are based on the experience that was already with these companies for with the same platform technology, but with other pathogens and with vaccines that were already under development. However, these are not the only vaccines that with whom we are talking. There are many other vaccines that came for discussion to the EMA, and a few more could be in the position of starting very soon a rolling review with the EMA for a potential approval in the near future. Next slide. So if I can conclude, with COVID-19 vaccine, we have the same types of studies as for any other vaccine. The only difference is that the timelines for the development have been shortened, and this thanks to the pooling of expertise, resources, and funds that made this possible. The studies that will be pivotal in supporting a positive benefit risk are large clinical trials with a rigorous design and would generate robust evidence for our deliberations. The expected benefit that we will see at time of approval will be demonstrated in the reduction in COVID-19 disease mainly, and we have to accept that there will be uncertainties at that point in time, particularly with respect to the long-term protection and what could be the ability of the vaccine to turn down the community transmission. Also, important evidence on safety will be available that would allow a robust conclusion also in that sense. Let me also say that the use of face mask, hand hygiene, and physical distance would remain important public health measure, at the very least until large amount of vaccines will be deployed and the vast majority of the population would have been vaccinated. And even then, we still don't know exactly what will be the impact. So it's very important that we maintain a rigorous approach in order to protect public health. And the last important statement from my side is that the high regulatory standards for quality, safety, and efficacy are here maintained, and that comprehensive data packages will be submitted in order to support the conclusions of the EMA. So this is the end of my presentation, and now I will hand over to Dr. Fergus Sweeney, who will talk to you about the regulatory process for evaluation and approval of vaccines at the EMA. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marco, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor to be able to present and describe to you the process for evaluation and approval of the vaccines. Next slide, please. So what I want to do is cover 4 key topics to look at how we bring together the expertise from the European network and how we are able to bring that to bear to carry out this evaluation process and do so in a rapid way using the rolling review and conditional marketing authorization terms you may well have seen already. And finally, to discuss the quality checks that are applied to the vaccine before it's released to the market. So I'm focusing on the evaluation. So Marco has covered all the development phases, the quality, non-clinical, and clinical trials. I'm now looking at the evaluation by EMA and our scientific experts, and then the marketing authorization decision by the European Commission. Clearly, as part, and Marco has indicated in the process, the manufacturers have already been scaling up their manufacturing. That will continue further post-authorization, but we are looking at as it is already developed. The important thing is that we have a very rigorous benefit-risk evaluation by our scientific experts. The role of EMA is to ensure the independent review of evidence generated for the COVID-19 vaccines and to make recommendations on their use in EU citizens, driven by patient and public health needs. EMA's recommendation will be based on the strength of the scientific evidence on a vaccine's safety, quality, and efficacy, and nothing else. And authorization will be granted when the evidence shows convincingly that the benefits of vaccination are greater than any risks of the vaccine. Safety is paramount. Vaccines are given to a very large population, many of whom are healthy. They're certainly not yet suffering from COVID in the large majority of cases, so it's to prevent that disease, and wherefore safety is very, very important. The benefits, of course, are very clear, and we need to establish those, and that there is a high proportion of benefit to risk. Now, in order to carry out this evaluation, Marco has already described the COVID-19 task force, which is in the box to the right of the slide, and that task force brings together experts from across the network in vaccines, in clinical trial methodology, in the manufacture of vaccines, the safety assessment, the clinical efficacy, and so on. And that allows us to support both the scientific advice with the developers, which we provide to developers, and then the ongoing process of evaluation. That has been set up specifically as part of our health threat plan for the COVID-19 pandemic. But of course, for the core assessment of the scientific evidence, we have the Committee for Human Medicinal Products, who evaluate all medicines brought to the EMA for evaluation, and our Pharmacovigilance Risk Assessment Committee, who look at the safety and risk minimization. They're looking at the risk management plans before marketing authorization, and then will clearly follow all of the emerging safety data, which my colleague Peter Arlett will explain in the next presentation in more detail once the product is placed on the market. But we have now in this situation a really unprecedented pooling of expertise in Europe to reduce timelines. Once we start the evaluation and the rolling review, we have a rapporteur and a co-rapporteur from 2 European medicines agencies, and they bring with them their quality, safety, and efficacy teams of experts to evaluate the dossiers that we're receiving from the company and the data that comes in, ask questions to the company, evaluate the responses, and then bring together that assessment so that we can bring that into the final CHMP opinion. This is a huge pooling of expertise. Both groups are meeting frequently, focused discussion, and working long hours through the days and weekends to achieve this. Next slide, please. So we have an approval process which is able to move rapidly because of the urgency of the situation, but nonetheless still ensures that we have a full evaluation of all the data that is available, and that this is done with the same thoroughness that we would do for any other medicine. And therefore, I want to describe to you how the process of rolling review, where we begin to look at evidence that is emerging from the companies and the data that they can provide as they complete each of the early studies through the non-clinical and clinical parts, but also as they build up their quality and manufacturing data. Following that, they then apply for a conditional marketing authorization, and we review that. So this is the formal marketing authorization application, like for any other medicine. In this case, we're using the tool of conditional marketing authorization, and I'll explain why that is the case. And then we reach the opinion at the CHMP and transfer that to the European Commission, who will then issue the conditional marketing authorization. Next slide, please. So rolling review is a process we have in place which enables us in public health emergency to evaluate data as soon as available. So as soon as a developer has the information and a report on a particular study, be that in the pharmaceutical development and quality and manufacturing, in the non-clinical studies, or as they progress through clinical trials, they provide that to us. We can evaluate that, ask questions, evaluate the answers, so that cumulatively we're working our way through the dossier as the information becomes available. And the pace at which we can do that is driven by the availability of the information and the ability of the companies to respond to the questions that we raise. There are several rolling review cycles can be done as the data continues to emerge. And once all the quality, safety, and efficacy data are ready, the company then formally applies for the marketing application to EMA. In all cases, this step of formal marketing application will take place unless, for whatever reason, the clinical trials at an earlier stage or some other development has prevented that from progressing. Next slide. So to look now in a little more detail at how this works and why it's effective in ensuring that we have a full evaluation of the dossier, but at the same time that we are able to proceed much sooner to the EMA opinion and European Commission marketing authorization. So if you look at the top in the diagram, you have a long pale bar on the left, reaching the marketing authorization application point, and then a darker blue bar on the right, where EMA evaluates the data. And in the standard situation, the developer will wait until they've completed all of the studies. And indeed, as Marcus showed, those studies may be done in a much more sequential way. The manufacturing data may not be generated until they have more confidence that it will be a successful medicine. So that period can be quite long, but they only submit the marketing authorization when all of the necessary data to complete that application is ready and is submitted in a complete unit. And then we carry on with the dark blue phase. And of course, as you can imagine, would we do that now, we would only and not even yet be receiving the full application dossier, and that would then be the time at which we would start to look at any of the data, and it would stretch far into next year. So clearly that's not workable in a public health emergency. And what we do is we have the rolling review cycle, and as you can see, data comes into us. As it becomes available, we are able to evaluate that using the assessment teams of the CHMP and the rapporteur and co-rapporteur. They can draw on other expertise from the ETF, from the Biologicals Working Party, for instance, where they need to look in detail at the manufacturing process, and we need to bring together the expertise from across the EU and other teams of experts who can bring their focus on particular aspects of the studies. When that data has reached a sufficient point and we are well advanced with the dossier, the company can then submit the most completed dossier for our formal marketing authorization. And because we've already gone through this period of rolling review, the outstanding work for the agency and our scientific experts to evaluate is much more limited. And we are able to go through that process in a shorter time, but without overall reducing the extent or rigor of our scientific evaluation or the necessary data that should be submitted to us. Thank you. Next slide. So we then move to the conditional marketing authorization. This is an approval for medicines to be used in public health emergencies. It's clearly foreseen for use in public health emergencies. The legislation refers to emergencies declared by the WHO or the European Union. And this can be done as soon as the data available shows that benefits outweigh the risks. Always, the benefits must clearly outweigh the risks, and particularly with vaccines, we need to be very sure that the safety is well understood and is at a very high level. However, we can then make conditions on the marketing authorization, which enable other data to be provided by the company after approval. So for instance, the longer term follow-up of people in clinical trials up to 1 year to show the extent of and duration of protection from COVID-19, the longer term safety information, but also studies, for instance, in manufacturing, which may help to improve the storage conditions for the vaccines so that they can be made available on an easier basis, but only after we have been able to rigorously assess that and ensure the quality standards are met. Next slide. So why is a conditional approval the most appropriate tool in the EU? Well, the key point is that this conditional marketing authorization is valid throughout the European Union for all our member states at the same time. All member states benefit, all citizens benefit from the same rigorous assessment, the same development of the conditions, the package leaflet, the prescribing information, but also at the same time. We're all together and we bring that together at the same time, and everybody can use that conditional marketing authorization then to progress to the vaccination campaigns. It has all the safeguards and controls of a standard marketing authorization in place to ensure a high level of protection to citizens during a mass vaccination campaign. And what's really important here is that vaccination will be carried out in many people. And we really need to have a high standard of assessment before that takes place, but also a very rigorous control framework within which to follow those vaccines as they are used on the market. And this is really important to give our citizens confidence in the safety and the efficacy of the vaccines, because the willingness of all of us to participate in these vaccination campaigns is also very important, and our confidence in those and the confidence of citizens is paramount. We have a robust monitoring plan for managing safety, and indeed Melanie will illustrate how that is also made public, and this continues after the authorization. There's a clear legal framework for evaluation of emerging efficacy data, because clearly more efficacy data will become available as the existing clinical trials continue to gather data, but also as new trials, which we may require the companies to do or which they may themselves or others conduct reveal new data. The manufacturing controls are there as for any other medicine. In vaccine cases, this includes additional batch controls, and I will describe those on a later slide. We have the full prescribing information, package leaflet, the defined storage conditions, and use of the vaccine. But again, if companies can provide more extended stability data, it may be possible to authorize a more practical storage arrangements. As you know, that's challenging for some of these vaccines, but only after that data has been provided and we're able to assess it to the necessary standards. But these things are part of the conditions that we may apply to the marketing authorization. There will be a plan for use of the vaccine in children. Additional studies will be required, or other data may need to be collected, be it on the manufacturing or on the safety or on the efficacy. And these are the conditions that we will apply and become part of the marketing authorization, and our companies are legally obliged to provide these within the defined timelines. So it provides a very strong framework for assessment before authorization, but for control of the use of the vaccines and the further data that becomes available on them throughout their use. Thank you. Next slide. Before, as I said, before vaccines are released on the market, there is extensive testing before we issue the marketing authorization, and part of the dossier that we require is extensive testing of batches and of the manufacturing process and the controls within that to ensure that the company is able to produce the vaccine on a continuous basis to meet those standards. And they must meet the specifications which are agreed by EMA. After approval, each batch of vaccine is approved via EMA and will be tested, each batch of a vaccine approved by the EMA will be tested, of course, by the manufacturers themselves, but also before they are used in immunization programs, there is an independent test done by the official medicine control laboratory. Next slide. So in conclusion, the scientific assessment carried out by EMA is a very important role. EU citizens rely on that evaluation and on the rigor of that evaluation. It sets out to protect the European population by providing effective vaccines and safe vaccines, and to support citizens' confidence in using these vaccines. There is stringent scientific evaluation by EMA on the quality, safety, and efficacy, with an unprecedented pooling of EU expertise from across the network, rolling review of data as it becomes available to enable fast approval, and conditional marketing authorization providing strong safeguards for the authorization and for the supervision of the product and evaluation of new data as it becomes available. Independent quality checks before vaccinations start. Now, this is a public health emergency. Some data will emerge post-approval, and we need to continue to monitor that, whether it comes from studies we've imposed or from monitoring which public health authorities are themselves carrying out. And on that point, it's my pleasure to hand over to Dr. Peter Arlett, Head of Data Analytics and Methods, who will describe the safety monitoring of COVID-19 vaccines. Peter.
Thanks very much, Fergus. So I'm going to present on the safety monitoring of the COVID-19 vaccines. Let's go to the next slide. So this slide provides an outline of what I'm going to cover, from why do we need to monitor the safety of medicines, who does the safety monitoring in the EU, are there different safety requirements for the vaccines compared to other medicines, how is safety of vaccines studied from development to use in real life, how is the safety of vaccines studied before and then after approval, how will we know if a side effect is caused by a vaccine, and then informing the public on suspected and confirmed side effects. Let's go to the next slide, please. This slide provides a link to both Marco and Fergus's presentation, which essentially represents the development of the COVID-19 vaccines through the different classical stages of vaccine and drug development. And you'll see with the red box on the right-hand side that the focus of my presentation is very much on the safety monitoring, with a particular focus on the on-market safety monitoring. Go to the next slide. So why do we need to monitor the safety of medicines? Well, all medicines, including vaccines, have both benefits and risks. At the time of approval, the evidence will come mainly from controlled randomized clinical trials. And after approval, the vaccines will be used in real conditions by a far, far larger population. So we need to monitor the safety to identify any new or changing risks as quickly as possible so that we can take action to optimize the safe and effective use of those vaccines by citizens. Next slide, please. This slide poses the question, who does the safety monitoring in the EU? But before we address that, let's just ask ourselves what we're talking about. So the EU has a comprehensive safety monitoring and risk management system in place, and this system is referred to as the EU pharmacovigilance system. If you look at the graphic on the left, you will see what we call the pharmacovigilance cycle, and let me just walk you through this. So we start by collecting, managing, and analysing all relevant data and information on the safety of the vaccines. Next, we review and assess these data and information to see if there are any new or changing issues that need to be addressed. We then take a decision and act, and we would communicate any important information to users of the vaccines. We then monitor to see that the action has been effective, and we start the cycle again in terms of collecting, managing, and analysing safety and data and information. If we now move to the right-hand side of the slide, this summarises key actors involved in safety monitoring in the European Union. Appropriately, patients are at the top, patients and citizens as the recipients of vaccines and the beneficiaries of vaccines in terms of preventing a serious COVID-19. But patients also have a very important role in terms of reporting suspected side effects, and we'll come back to that later. Regulatory agencies have important responsibilities laid down in law to monitor the safety and to take action in the event of a safety issue. Marketing authorization holders, or otherwise known as vaccine manufacturers, again have legal responsibilities to collect all available safety data, to report safety data and alerts to the regulatory agencies, and to conduct safety studies in certain circumstances. And then lastly, healthcare professionals working within the national healthcare systems, important role in terms of safe administration of the vaccines and reporting suspected side effects. Let's go to the next slide. Are there different safety requirements for COVID-19 vaccines? Well, the foundation is the same. The core safety requirements are the same for COVID-19 vaccines as they are for any other vaccine in the EU. It's important to remind you that vaccines are only approved if overall the benefits outweigh their risks. Importantly though, COVID-19 vaccines will be used in millions of EU citizens in a short period of time. And due to the large number of vaccinated people, we need to ensure safety monitoring reacts quickly. If you look at the graphic on the right, this is trying to represent the fact that we will generate very large volumes of safety data and information in a short period of time because of the millions and perhaps tens of millions of people that will be vaccinated in a short duration, compared, if you look at the blue box, to the more gradual rollout of a medicine or a vaccine, which would be the normal case. This is why additional resources are being mobilized to closely monitor safety and assess new information. Let's go to the next slide, please. How is safety of vaccines studied from the development stage to use in real life? Again, you'll see the same graphic is used showing the development stages of the vaccine. And we're going to touch in subsequent slides on the safety during drug development and then the safety of authorized vaccines. But I just want to take this opportunity to introduce the EUDeVigilance database. This is the European database of suspected side effects, suspected adverse reactions to medicines. This starts collecting suspected side effects from clinical trials, and then this is where all the safety reports from all the European reports coming from patients, from healthcare professionals in Europe, but also around the world, are pooled and then scrutinized to try and detect new or changing safety issues once the product's on the market. You'll see on the right-hand side of the slide, we summarize the post-marketing safety monitoring. So information from regulators worldwide, medical literature, specific safety studies, and then of course, reports of suspected side effects from patients and healthcare professionals. And we'll go into that in a little bit more detail in a subsequent slide. Let's go to the next slide. So how is the safety of vaccines studied before approval? And Marco, in his presentation, touched on this, but I just wanted to summarize it because it gives a good, an important context to the post-authorization monitoring that I'll go on then to describe. So first of all, to remind you that safety starts with ensuring that vaccines are of good quality. And this is demonstrated by studies showing their purity. As Fergus emphasized, testing is conducted to ensure that each batch of vaccine is of good quality, and vaccines undergo non-clinical studies to exclude toxicity. Vaccines are being studied in some of the largest clinical trials we've seen at the EMA, involving tens of thousands of individuals. And these large clinical trials have vigorous safety monitoring, which allows us to estimate the frequency of the more common side effects. Safety follow-up of volunteers, as Marco elaborated, is for about 6 weeks, and then there are extended clinical trials which will pick up any longer-term effects. Let's go to the next slide. Let's now ask the question, why and how is the safety monitored after approval? Let's start with the why. The why is because we want to detect previously unrecognized or changing side effects so that we can optimize safe and effective use. Moving on to the how, we have intensive analysis of reports of suspected side effects that are sent in by patients and healthcare professionals. Manufacturers are obliged to conduct safety studies. Additional independent studies will be performed at European level on the safety of vaccines when used in real life. And there's intensive international collaboration on the COVID-19 vaccines already established so that we can exchange data, information, alerts, and can discuss any emerging safety issues. Next slide, please. Well, how will we know if a side effect is caused by the vaccine? Now, this is an important question. And the first thing to say is we have established analysis techniques to assess whether a side effect is likely to be caused by a vaccine. What's the issue here? Well, since millions and perhaps tens of millions of people will be getting the vaccine in a short time, many of them will develop illnesses for other reasons in close proximity to vaccination. If these occur just after vaccination, they may well be reported as suspected adverse reactions, suspected side effects to the vaccine, when in fact the association was just due to chance. It was a temporal relationship rather than a causal relationship. But we need to investigate all reports using these established analysis techniques, and if an analysis concludes that a new side effect is caused by a vaccine, it's included in the package leaflet and we communicate it to all our stakeholders. Next slide, please. I want to touch on informing the public of suspected and confirmed side effects. EMA is fully committed to high levels of transparency and keeping patients and healthcare professionals fully informed so that they can make their choices. For example, public access to the EUDebates database, so the European database of side effects, has been in place since 2012 through the website adrreports.eu. Publication of data from reports of suspected side effects to the COVID-19 vaccines will be updated weekly. We will also be publishing COVID-19 safety updates. So these are narrative summaries of any reviews conducted and conclusions reached. We will be publishing proactively the risk management plans for COVID-19 vaccines. These are the plans that bind the pharmaceutical companies to do additional studies in the post-authorization phase. Established side effects, of course, will be included in the package leaflet. And luckily, we have very well established networks with national medicines agencies and stakeholder groups at European level. So if necessary, we can push out information on the benefits and risks of the vaccines if there's a need to push out that information rapidly. Let's go to the next slide, please. You can report side effects yourself. This is a really important message that we want to give today, that reporting suspected side effects following vaccination is critical. Anyone can report a suspected side effect, either to their national authority or to the vaccine manufacturer. All reports are then sent very quickly to EUDebates, the European database of side effects, where the data are analysed to detect new or changing side effects, and anonymised data are then made public for all to review. So we call on you to please report suspected side effects. Go to the last slide, please. I'd like to conclude by reminding us that vaccines are a key pillar of public health and have proven to prevent serious disease. No medicine's 100% safe, so like any other medicines, vaccine can have side effects. The majority are mild, and even rare, serious side effects must be balanced against the prevention of severe or even fatal disease like COVID-19. We have a strong EU pharmacovigilance system in place, and safety will not be compromised. Unprecedented steps are being taken to monitor safety in practice, to be transparent, and to take action immediately. I remind again that use of a face mask and hygiene, physical distance remain important. And I put it to you that COVID-19 vaccine safety will be stronger with your participation. And again, we say, please report suspected side effects. Thank you for listening to that presentation. I hand over now to Melanie Carr, who is Head of Stakeholders and Communication Division at EMA, and she will cover the transparency, engagement and communication elements. Melanie.
Thank you, Peter, and good afternoon to those in the virtual meeting room and those following this meeting online. So I'd like to touch on EMA's approach to transparency and communication, which are clearly priorities for us during times of crisis. Now, it's important to be able to access information and also understand the rationale underpinning important decisions on vaccines. Extraordinary measures have been put in place to enhance the level of transparency for COVID-19 medicines, and we really recognise that this is key to reinforcing trust not only in regulatory decisions, but also particularly in any vaccines being authorised. We don't just want to publish information, but to communicate better, so add some context to the data released and explain the science in plain language. Engagement remains crucial for us, so actively listening to questions, to any concerns we can hopefully then address them, and involving stakeholders and members of the public in our activities. So we're very pleased to have the opportunity to talk about COVID-19 vaccines with you today. Next slide. So what information is being published? Well, you've heard from Marco, Fergus and Peter describing the various stages of a vaccine's life cycle, and we're providing information throughout the vaccine's life cycle. So during development, we're transparent about those medicines that have received EMA advice. We regularly publish information from our scientific committee meetings and highlight the topics discussed. We announce publicly the start of the rolling review or the evaluation of an application for marketing authorization so that you'll know what's coming through the pipeline. At the stage of the marketing authorization, we'll publish the outcome of the assessment and the product information in all EU languages. And very importantly, an overview which provides information about the vaccine and why it's approved. And that's in lay language and also available in all EU languages. We'll rapidly publish the more detailed European Public Assessment Report, what we call the EPAR, within a few days, and that provides the public with comprehensive information about the EMA's assessment and explains why we have taken the decisions that we have made. We'll also provide more information about the safety profile, any risk mitigation or surveillance measures in the form of the risk management plan. Thereafter, the clinical data submitted to EMA and the applications for COVID-19 medicines is made public. And this is in the hope that supporting making global research more efficient, but also allowing public scrutiny and review of our assessments by external parties. Post-authorization will update you on any important changes and publish regular safety updates more frequently than usual, at least every month. On to the next slide, please. So how are we communicating? Well, we've developed a series of new information materials, including key facts on COVID-19 and development and approval of COVID-19 vaccines. We're responding to many queries from members of the public, as well as patients, healthcare professionals, academics, and the media. We're also updating on key developments in the press, organizing public meetings like this one, and engaging on social media, as well as through interviews in the media. We're working with ECDC to provide content for the recently launched European Vaccination Information Portal, which I would really encourage you to have a look at. It has information available in all EU languages. And as and when, we'll be providing safety communications as and when needed. But we're not doing this alone. We're working very closely together with our external stakeholders and partners. On to the next slide, please. So we're actively engaging with patients and health professionals, and they're represented in EMA's Pandemic Task Force and through our regular working party meetings. And they're also very kindly assisting us in user testing our information materials. We're also very closely working with the European Commission, the European Centre for Disease Control and Prevention, and importantly, the national competent authorities across the network. We're making important efforts to communicate in the most meaningful way, using plain language, user testing messages to promote understanding, and it's very important to us to hear your views. We're very keen to listen to and address questions and concerns on vaccines as they arise and understand where the gaps in information are and how we can better communicate. Looking forward to hearing your views today. And on my final slide, next one please. Here is a link to our website, further information where all COVID-19 related material is available. It's accessible through our homepage and it's flagged in red for ease of reference. Thank you very much, and I'll now pass the floor back to our moderator. Over to you, Noel.
Thank you very much to Melanie and to all the other speakers for taking us through the life cycle of a COVID-19 vaccine in such a succinct manner. Before having a break for 5 minutes, perhaps I would like to inform you that we have some 3,500 persons who are following the live broadcast, so which really shows that there is quite an interest in the general public in terms of how the EMA is dealing with the authorization process for COVID-19 vaccines. So I propose we are a little bit ahead of schedule, but that is not bad at all, as it will allow us to have more time during the question and answer session. So I propose we break now for 5 minutes, and then we'll come back at 2:15. See you later on. So welcome back, and thank you very much for joining us for the second part of this event, which is to listen to you. So what we heard, or the message that we tried to convey during the first part is that it is of utmost importance that trust is built and trust is maintained throughout the process that is run at the level of the EMA in relation to the authorization of COVID-19 vaccines. And not only during that process, but also when the vaccines have then subsequently been authorized and have been rolled out. In order to achieve that transparency, as we have shown, as we have been elaborating this afternoon, is extremely important, but also engagement and getting in dialogue with all of you, with healthcare professionals and with the general public. And therefore, it is so important that we listen to any particular comments and concerns that you may have, and that we try to answer them in the most appropriate way. Now, we will now hear from various members of the public. We have allocated 4 minutes per speaker to enable as many interventions as possible. We received a large number of speaker requests, and unfortunately, we could not accommodate everyone. So we had to introduce a selection process, and we endeavor to include a well-balanced range of stakeholder groups, affiliations, and geographical locations. We have also aimed to hear as wide a range of major concerns as possible. You will hear from patients, carers, consumers, citizens, healthcare professionals, and pharmaceutical industry and academia. Those that were not selected to speak have been invited to join the WebEx virtual room if time allows, and I'm sure that we can arrange for that today. After the series of public interventions, we will give the floor for additional open comments. Also at that time, you may also comment using the chat box. So I will now pass on the floor to our first speaker, who is Mrs. Marilena Vrana from the European Heart Network. So Marilena, please go ahead.
Thank you, Noel. Hope you hear me well. Thank you for giving me the time. And since I'm the first one to speak, I would like to extend my gratitude to all the speakers so far for the update they have provided. It is reassurance to hear from the agency's leadership and experts that safety is top priority before rolling out any coronavirus vaccine to the public. People need reassurance that though research and development has been faster than any other vaccine, the proper procedure was followed and no compromises to safety and quality were made. Many of you have said that the vaccine will not end the pandemic. Vaccination will end the pandemic. And for that, people's trust is paramount. All of us need to build that trust by being transparent about what we know and what we don't know, and leave no room for misinterpretation of facts or the emergence of unsubstantiated theories that are already circulating. We have shared some examples of such theories with the agency's communications team to be considered as the campaign is being designed. Fragile groups of the population, like people living with cardiovascular disease, which the European Heart Network represents, have been tremendously affected by the pandemic, as they are at high risk of contracting the virus and have a worse prognosis. Before the pandemic, people with cardiovascular disease represented 60 million people in the EU. That is a little over of 13% of the total EU 27 population. And this number is very likely to increase due to the pandemic and long-term complications of COVID that are still being researched. Cardiovascular patients will probably be one of the first groups to get vaccinated. It is therefore critical to address questions and concerns they have about getting vaccinated for COVID-19. The evidence about the benefits versus the risks must be articulated clearly and in lay terms to the public. What effectiveness means needs to be explained. Will vaccines prevent COVID-19 infection, or will they prevent the onset of the disease? Marco did cover this in his presentation earlier, referring to prevention of symptomatic COVID. we would like to emphasize the need to explain this further to people and cover what does this mean for high-risk individuals. Are there any potential risks they need to take into account? Can they still contract COVID and be asymptomatic? And what would this mean for their health? Explain and contextualize both efficacy and potential risks and adverse effects. Another question coming from patients of our members is, how many patients have been vaccinated to date during trials, and how many of them have chronic conditions like CVD? Marco also covered this, that inclusion of people with underlying conditions have been recommended to be included in the trials. Do refer to numbers and observations deriving from these groups. It was also mentioned during presentations that trials covered various age groups. Based on the current data, will new vaccines have a lower success rate in elderly population or the same success rate? Last but not least, a question we often hear from cardiovascular patients who have already contracted the virus. Do you have any data or any research in the pipeline on the potential effectiveness of the vaccine for those who already had COVID-19? Thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to raise our comments and our patients' needs in this platform and within the Patients and Consumer Working Party.
Thank you very much, Marilena. As you mentioned, Marco already addressed quite a number of the topics that you have raised in his presentation. Marco, do you would like to add anything to what you have already mentioned during your slide deck presentation?
Yes, thank you very much, Noel, and thanks, Marilena, for your question, which are very important. As said, it's very difficult for us to be very precise on how many subjects with other comorbidities are included in the trials, but indeed there has been an effort to include them at least to a certain extent, let's say at least 10%. Of course, this is a matter of review, and we will be very clear and transparent on how many of these subjects are included into the studies. Also, the studies are including a certain amount of subjects that already got COVID, or at least, let's say, they were seropositive at baseline. Of course, we may not expect a significant benefit for this subject, at least in the short term, but of course, we don't know if maybe vaccination in the long term can provide advantages. And anyway, it's very important to have an adequate safety database to really understand that the vaccines also in this subject that already encountered the virus is not causing any problem. Of course, as you said, you're absolutely right that it will be important to understand what is the impact on infection. And that's why, again, we will be very transparent in saying what these trials at the time of approval will tell us in this sense, and whether there is a need of more research in order to have a better understanding to what extent the vaccines are really able not only to prevent symptomatic disease, even mild disease, but also in preventing asymptomatic infection, as indeed this will be so important in making sure that we are not spreading the virus anymore. And we will come back on this, and for sure there will be further studies addressing these aspects. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marco. We move on now to the next speaker, who is Peggy Maguire from the European Institute of Women's Health. So Peggy, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the speakers for the very clear and comprehensive presentations this morning, and they were excellent. Well, I'm bringing you the discussions that have been taking place internally within the Institute around the concerns from our membership. And as Emer Cook has already stated, the COVID-19 crisis has highlighted and exacerbated issues in society, and we feel that they've exacerbated the sex and gender and age inequities in society, which need to be really approached in the response and in the vaccines. Recent research on cardiovascular disease, osteoporosis and depression, for example, has identified significant differences among women and men with respect to the distribution of certain diseases. Women and men have different sex and gender related risks for developing certain diseases and conditions and respond differently to treatment. And for example, biological differences between males and females can affect how a medicine works in the body. And this is one of the concerns that we would have in relation to the vaccine. And additionally, patterns of gene expression differ between males and females, and this has important implications for health. The coronavirus has implications for the treatment also of pregnant women. We still have very little data on the impact of COVID on pregnant women, although the Centre for Disease Prevention and Control say that clinical manifestations in pregnant women can range from asymptomatic to mild. However, there have been reports of critical cases in countries like Sweden, and I know Marco addressed this in his presentation. He addressed the issue of pregnancy. But at the moment, as I said, there's very little data and information on the impact of COVID on women and pregnancies. Women are also generally underrepresented in clinical trials, and ever since the tragedy of thalidomide in the 1950s, the general assumption then was that men did not differ from women, except for the reproductive organs. So attention to sex and gender in clinical trials is extremely important, and it is a safety issue as well. And there are also medical products are safer and more effective for everyone when clinical research includes diverse population groups. The new clinical trials regulation aims to create an environment that is favourable to conducting clinical trials in the EU with the highest standards of ethical and safety protection for participants. And the regulation requires more transparency of clinical trial data, including the population groups for whom the medicines are intended. And it states in the regulation that unless otherwise justified in the protocol, the subjects participating in a clinical trial should represent the population groups, for example, gender and age groups, that are likely to use the medicinal product investigated in the clinical trial, and non-inclusion has to be justified. So I suppose to end the presentation, I would like to ask possibly two questions, and some of which has been covered already by Marco in his presentation. So in line with the clinical trials regulation, will EMA, in the evaluation of the current COVID vaccines, consider age and gender balance in the current vaccine clinical trials, as well as consideration of vulnerable groups such as pregnant women, chronic disease patients, ethnic minorities and older people? And secondly, following the approval and rollout of the vaccines, will post-marketing surveillance collect data on the safety and effectiveness of COVID-19 vaccines, disaggregated by age and sex? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Peggy. I think the first question, as you mentioned, was already being addressed by Marco. So perhaps for the second question, Peter, do you would like to come in?
Yes, I can. Yes, I can give a very quick answer. Peggy, thank you for the question. In terms of post-marketing monitoring, yes, data will be collected and will be broken down by age and gender. And I also want to reassure you specifically on the pregnancy side. So EMA has put in place studies with academia specifically to look at COVID-19 disease in pregnant women and to look at the effects of different therapeutics and to look at the effects of pregnancy, both on women's health, but also on the unborn child. And that study is a big cross-European study being coordinated by the University of Utrecht. And I believe there's information on our website if you need a bit more detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Then we move on to the next speaker, who is François Houillet from the European Organization for Rare Diseases, EURORDIS. So you have the floor, François.
Thank you, Noel, and good afternoon. The perception of a health threat due to COVID-19 is high or very high for 71% of people living with a rare disease, based on EURORDIS Rare Barometer survey we conducted from April to May amongst 7,000 with 7,000 respondents. With vaccines and other measures, we hope to be back to our normal life as soon as possible, even though life is never completely normal when you live with a severe disease. Normality is when you can visit your hospital again with no fear of getting the virus. EURORDIS trusts the high-quality evaluation of vaccines by this agency. Over the years, we've learned, observed, witnessed how you work. EURORDIS believes EU citizens are better placed with a stringent evaluation by the EMA, probably no mandatory vaccination, but the freedom to choose between 2, 3 or more vaccines, discussing with our doctors. European institutions already ordered 1.5 billion doses of several vaccines. Lower prices were negotiated and vaccines should be reimbursed in the EU with a call for vaccines to be affordable in third countries. The evaluation of vaccines should be science-driven. EURORDIS condemns attempts to influence the evaluation process, like in the USA, Russia, and even UK and Hungary to some extent. The technologies used to develop these vaccines were launched in 2013 for some of them with MERS and SARS-CoV-1 virus already. Research did not just start in December 2019, but there are questions related to the technologies. For example, is it okay to develop adenovirus-based vaccines when several gene therapies use adenovirus as a vector? People living with a chronic and or rare disease should be among the first beneficiaries. Certainly, healthcare professionals and the elderly should be prioritized. Among elderly, this virus is as deadly as the Ebola virus. When the benefit risks will evolve with more data coming in and longer-term follow-up obtained, lower-risk people will have more information to make their decisions. And we are getting prepared. Our organizations engage with their centers of expertise and the European reference networks. For example, in Rett syndrome, clinicians started to explain that the risks of experiencing a side effect to a vaccine are far, far less than the risks of being infected by the coronavirus without a vaccine. Even if the safety profiles of the vaccine seem okay so far, there might be some specific questions, and ORDs will share others in writing with the EMA. For example, in Dravet syndrome, fever as a side effect to the vaccine could trigger seizures. So what to do? Possible interactions between vaccines using the mRNA technology and antisense therapies, also based on mRNA, raise questions. Hereditary hemorrhagic telangiectasia, rare cancers, immune deficiencies, with blood transfusions and immunosuppressants that are used, is there a need for a washout period before getting the vaccine? Auto-inflammatory diseases, should patients stop their anti-inflammatory treatment? How long before and when to start again? To conclude, we need to discuss arrangements for the continuation of clinical trials for vaccine, for example, using crossover design or active control trials. There will be other randomized clinical trials starting next year, so we need to discuss what are the best ethical arrangements. We need to organize real-time post-authorization surveillance, for example, using mobile applications for reporting any feedback. Patients should express their concern now. There is still time. For example, if you are in a clinical trial for a treatment for your disease and your doctor your doctor should check if the study protocol authorizes the use of that vaccine. Rodis is confident that the EMA and national authorities will continue to listen and to respond to all questions the public might have. Engaging and listening is an essential component of transparency and trust. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francois. I think you highlighted a number of very important points that, of course, we will take into consideration when moving forward. Also would like to thank you and Rodis very much for the trust that you always have put in the agency's work. We move on now to Ancila Santos from BEUC, the European and Consumer Organization. Ancila?
Hi, hello, I hope you can hear me well. Well, first of all, on behalf of BEUC, the European Consumer Organization, we really welcome this initiative from the EMA to organize a public event on COVID-19 vaccines, precisely because the pandemic requires making vaccines available faster than usual. It's very important to address questions from citizens on how vaccines are developed and approved. And we strongly believe that this open communication that we are having today is important for mutual understanding and to safeguard public trust in the regulatory system. In addition, there are three important things that are relevant from the consumer perspective. First of all, we must ensure transparency, full transparency around clinical trial results. This is very important to enable a better understanding of regulatory decisions and also quality of care. And in this regard, we really welcome the EMA'S decision to make the clinical study reports of COVID-19 vaccines and treatments, when approved, available, together with other important documents, such as full risk management plans, as it was mentioned before. Secondly, it will be important that when the vaccine is available, that consumers have easy access to product information. And by this, I mean access on information on the vaccine's safe use, contraindications, any potential side effects. And although electronic product information is an interesting tool, it is not equally useful to everyone, for example, the elderly. This is why it will be important that package leaflet or printouts are available when people get the vaccine. And the third point is that all these communication materials must speak to people. They must be understandable, they must be clear. And for this, it will be important to include consumer representatives, but also laypersons as much as possible in the revision of this product information of the package leaflet. And on that front, I would like to say that at BEUC, we would be happy to contribute to this exercise, as we do often upon EMA's request. And speaking about consumer engagement, of course, it will be important to engage consumers and patient representatives in the development and dissemination of public communication campaigns, which are very important to counteract misinformation and disinformation, especially around vaccines. And I would like to conclude by stressing that, of course, for us it's very relevant that COVID-19 vaccines, like any other medicine, is approved based on strong data on safety and efficacy. It is very reassuring to hear from the EMA that safety is paramount. We agree that we will need also a solid plan in place to continuing monitoring the vaccines and gathering data to answer remaining questions, as Marco mentioned. And in that context, it will be very important that consumers can easily flag to regulators any suspected adverse reaction. This is essential for you then to take quick action as necessary. And obviously, it goes without saying that having a strong rolling out plan in place will be important also to safeguard this public confidence that I was mentioning at the beginning in the regulatory system. And with that, I would like to conclude by thanking again the EMA for this exercise, and by saying that we look forward to keeping an open dialogue with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ansela, and thank you also for highlighting aspects such as robust evidence gathering, the need for transparency and engagement with the general public, which of course we fully support. We move on now to the next speaker, which is Michel Rivasi, who is a member of the European Parliament. So, Michel, the floor is open to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you to organize this meeting. It's very important to have information. My first intervention is about we need transparency and access to data to build confidence. Transparency as the first remedy to restore confidence. As a member of the European Parliament, I would like to stress the importance of transparency in the development and authorization of a vaccine. Ensuring confidence in vaccine requires total transparency for both producers and regulators. It's not corporate communication that will restore the confidence of citizens in the vaccine system, but it is a safe and reliable information. The acceptance of this vaccine developed so rapidly and by the new technology requires a high degree of confidence in the manufacturers and especially in the approval authorities. By playing the transparency card, you allow confidence in both processes and decisions while increasing the level of protection of the population. We know that often the result of biologic or health studies provided by the industry tend to be found in the best interest of industry. The article by Peter Doshi in the British Medical Journal published in October 2020, the error in dosing of the AstraZeneca vaccine corrected by the University of Oxford, or the fraudulent article unpublished by The Lancet last May, are concrete examples of error which could distort scientific studies and which require independent verification to be detected. All clinical trial data, protocol, raw data, result, but be freely accessible to the public. Access to clinical trial data should take place before the authorization, not immediately afterward, as the EMA now offers for the COVID treatment and vaccine. Making clinical data available prior to authorization allows civil society, stakeholders, journalists, and experts to conduct their own industry independent check. Ensure the possibility of comparing products to enable states to implement the best possible health policies and avoid substandard. Several vaccines are currently in phase 3. More will be there in the coming months. For fear of running out of vaccines, member states are tempted to buy a variety of different vaccines. We must have the means to compare them with each other. to compare their positive effect, negative effect, composition, in particular the presence and effect of adjuvant, the effect on the different type of population and the duration of this effect. The EMA has a responsibility to ensure that these comparisons are made according to the necessary scientific rule, randomized compare tree. If EMA want to do that, the comparison of all the vaccines, the need of truly complete data to guarantee reliable and objective evaluation. We must at all costs avoid making authorization decisions based on incomplete, preliminary or partial data. To assess different vaccine candidates, it is extremely important to have all the data on safety, efficacy and quality. Swiss medical regulator, Swiss Medic, says it does not have the necessary information to approve the 3 anti-COVID vaccines like Pfizer, Moderna or AstraZeneca. Swiss Medic is particularly interested in obtaining data on subgroup or on pre-existing disease of the people who participate in this clinical study. Is the EMA satisfied with the data it received from the companies? Is there any data we don't have yet? We must be clear on the parameter on which we judge this vaccine. What is their action? Do they have an effect on the development of the disease and its severity, on mortality, on infection, on contagion? Do they have different effects on different populations? How long do these effects last? We must ensure that we comply with all stages of the existing regulation, including carrying out impact studies that are required to be done in advance. Do not repeat lack of evaluation on the Tamiflu or Remdesivir. In the case of Remdesivir, the gray area needs to be clarified. The EMA still has to decide on the conditional authorization for the European marketing of this drug. Beyond the lack of efficacy of Remdesivir, demonstrate in several studies, in particular by the result on solidarity clinical trial, the toxic risk of this drug for the kidney and liver functional now. It's very important to have confidence in you. You have the support of European Parliament. So be careful, be very careful. And if you give authorization, we must are sure that there is no big side effect and it's good for the population. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michel. Thank you for your very wise words and for the concerns that you have expressed. I would also like to thank you very much for your continued support to the European Medicines Agency. Thank you. So we move on now to the next speaker, which is Norbert Oberdorfer. So Norbert, you have the floor.
Hello, and thank you for your presentation. I'm a journalist from Austria, from Lower Austria, working for a regional newspaper, and I sense as an individual a lot of concerns, serious concerns, coming from the people on the COVID vaccines. People especially troubled by the mRNA vaccines, the speedy development and research, and the lack of knowledge on possible long-term effects. For example, in Austria, now we are running public health tests, antigen tests organized by the government. And for now, only 1/3 of the population takes part. Also, recent media polls stress that people demand more information on the vaccines. And they say that only 1 in 5 Austrians would go for a vaccination for now. So I see this lack of information and no space for respectful and serious debate. The social media are definitely not a good space for that, and badly or not answered questions provide plenty of ground and fruitful soil for growing conspiracy theories, not only since the tragic event of 9/11 back then. According to the Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung, conspiracy theories also represent some kind of psychological shadows of ourselves and of our society. So I think that we really need to take them serious and the people serious, and therefore stay open for dialogue and debate. There's always this danger of bubble building. I know myself, whether scientifically or politically driven, and this can lead really to deep divisions in our society. On the other hand, there are certain groups and individuals who can push mistrust and therefore misuse the current situation and the anxiety of the people. So I think if the EMA, the European Union, scientists, politicians involved, and us journalists do not manage to explain and to deliver easy to understand, but nevertheless full scope explanations on how, why, who, and also who profits around the vaccines development, trust among the people and the citizens might further erode. From my neighborhood where I live, I hear from academics to professionals, teachers, craftsmen, and farmers that even solid facts and explanations provided to them would leave them still skeptical and uncertain on the vaccines and their development. So there might be even a basic mistrust in politics, of course, and in certain global players, maybe one reason of many. So I think the influence and the interdependency and interests of politics, global pharmacy enterprises, and certain global foundations, as well as the individuals behind, will be very important to make public and transparent to all citizens. It will be as well crucial to stress the obvious risks and dangers of the vaccines, which you have already stated partly, and also the monitoring, I think, is really, really important, besides the positive effects, to prevent or to elevate the effects of COVID illness. So-called half-truths are not helping to build confidence. I think quite the contrary. They are not contributing to dialogue between authorities and citizens. People, I sense, people are searching the truth, especially in such crisis like we are now in. And if they don't find it, they create their own. So to sum up, I see my mission as a citizen and my professional role as journalist to foster a free and open dialogue, to report the last possible version of the truth, and not to pre-frame or defame individuals and groups as conspiracy theorists, because then we kill the debate and the dialogue. So I try to follow the principle, which is also applies in justice, audiatur et altera pars, let the other side be heard as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Norbert. And once again, the issue of transparency, communication coupled with targeted messages is raised, and of course fully supported, as we have already elaborated upon during the presentations. We move on now to Fanos Anastasiou. Fanos, you have the floor.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for the useful presentations, and particularly the openness in acknowledging what is still unknown. It is enormously exciting that through vaccines, we're finally seeing a light at the end of the tunnel and a way out of this global pandemic. With cautious optimism, it's important for society to work together during this process. It is, however, vital that the EMA acknowledges that the public has reasonable concerns around the speed of the regulatory approval process. It is vital, as Norbert just explained, I think, to avoid polarization and ensure that the public does not split into two camps, a separate pro-vaccine and another anti-vaccine camp. It is only natural for people to be worried about things like optimism bias or residual uncertainty in the results. The EMA should actually encourage cautious interrogation and ease vaccine concerns through a fully transparent approach to communication and an honest assessment of the benefits and remaining uncertainties of approved vaccines. It is also important for the public to frame concerns as constructive criticism and to engage with the EMA, but as well as governments. The EMA again has a strong role as an enabler for such a process through events like today's, but also more complete and fully transparent FAQs that are accessible to the general public and not the people who just are able to find this information in what you could call niche websites like the EMA for the general public. Local engagement plans are completely necessary. A strong proactive outreach effort to reach out to European citizens is required. It is important to also acknowledge that what we still do not know. Honesty will build trust with the public, and communication should not feel like a sales pitch. It should rather be much more interactive. I had a big list of questions, and some of which were already addressed today, so I will focus on questions I did not hear answers to. The likelihood of long-term side effects we just heard today has been briefly evaluated, and actually the approval will be a conditional one. So what happens to conditions assigned to the conditional market authorization? What if those conditions are not met, and what will the reaction of the EMA be? Sharing the track record of other vaccines in terms of long-term side effects would certainly ease public concerns. Let's acknowledge again what we don't know. And for example, are there additional risks presented by vaccines that utilize new technologies never used before for human vaccines such as mRNA? And should we be more conservative in the approval of such vaccines? How quickly can we learn from a country that is ahead in schedule with countries already taking approvals? Specifically, lessons learned should be extracted, for example, from the UK, but also other countries outside Europe, such as Russia and China, pushing on with different vaccines. We can learn a lot also by the process and the public reaction to the vaccinations. How is a cost-benefit analysis done in a scientific way to ensure that it is objective rather than subjective? That analysis should be performed separately for different groups, such as ethnic groups, age groups, vulnerable groups, and should be easily accessible to the public so that they can relate to their specific circumstances and the specific cost-benefit analysis. Thank you very much. I think this kind of event is very helpful for the public to feel more engaged.
Thank you, Fanos. And you already mentioned several topics that have already been addressed in the slide deck. The issue about long-term side effects was also highlighted by Peter. It is important that you put in place the necessary studies post-authorization to acquire further knowledge, a very important tool that we have in the context of the conditional marketing authorization, or these risk management plans which are being published now in full, which highlight very much what we know, what we don't know yet, and where further research is needed, and how we will obtain that. Your question about the conditional marketing authorization, if conditions are not fulfilled at that moment in time, of course, we have to review the conditional marketing authorization. After some time, a conditional marketing authorization can be transformed in a full marketing authorization, but conditions are there to be fulfilled, and they have a legal meaning. And if conditions are not fulfilled, we can review the conditional marketing authorization and even withdraw it. So it is a stick behind the door, I always call it, in order to make sure that the pharmaceutical companies continue to honor the conditions that have been put as part of that particular marketing authorization. So we move on now to the next speaker. And so far we have been listening to patients, to carers, to citizens, and to the general public at large. We move on now to industry. Would like, of course, industry is a party in all this, and would like to hear the view of Vaccines Europe. And I give the floor to Sue Middleton.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. COVID-19 is a public health challenge of unprecedented scale, which requires all stakeholders to work together in a concerted effort. Vaccines Europe represents companies who research, develop, or manufacture vaccines in Europe. And in response to this devastating pandemic, our members have been working around the clock in search of a vaccine, or to be more precise, in search of several vaccines that can then be manufactured at scale. Vaccine companies are working in collaboration with each other, with academic institutions, governments, and regulators such as EMA in this important endeavour. We now have 3 vaccines for which have proven efficacy in late-stage, very large clinical trials. This is giving us all cause for hope. These positive results are being evaluated by regulators around the world. And whilst these vaccines have been developed at unprecedented speed, it's really important that we, the industry, regulators, health professionals, and frankly, all of us, build confidence that COVID-19 vaccines, just like all vaccines, are subject to rigorous testing for safety and efficacy. As colleagues at EMA have reported this morning, the safety requirements for COVID-19 vaccines are the same as for any other vaccine and have not been lowered in the context of this pandemic. The positive results seen today are based on very large, well-defined clinical trials recruiting tens of thousands of volunteers around the world. Many other vaccines are still in development, and we hope that these will also prove successful in the near future. COVID vaccines will only be approved based on objective scientific review of data from large-scale, high-quality, randomized and observer-blinded clinical trials. And we wouldn't have it any other way. In a joint statement earlier this year, the CEOs of 9 leading European and American vaccine developers have made this clear. These vaccine industry leaders committed to apply for regulatory approval only after demonstrating safety and efficacy through phase 3 studies designed and conducted to meet the requirements of expert regulatory authorities. If our regulators approve COVID-19 vaccines for use in a broad population, this will not be the end of the process. The safety and effectiveness of these vaccines will continue to be monitored during the rollout. We really appreciate the flexibility granted by the European Commission and Member States for labelling and packaging requirements. And I really would like to remind you that it's critical to have a single pack for all Member States in order to meet the demand as quickly as possible across Europe. It's worth finishing by reflecting on the fact that approval of these vaccines is just the start. Our members started manufacturing these vaccines months ago, before they knew they would be successful. And even so, vaccines will not be available in sufficient quantity to vaccinate everybody at the start of the rollout. And it's great to see member states making clear recommendations on which groups to vaccinate first. Companies will continue to work closely with member states and European authorities to ensure the rollout of these vaccines is as smooth as possible, reaching people in Europe and around the world as quickly as possible in order to let us all get back to normal. I have no specific questions for EMA. I just want to express the support and gratitude of the industry for your collaboration so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue, and also thanks for industry to provide their viewpoint. Of course, you're one of the important parties as well in addressing this unprecedented public health challenge. So we move on now to the next set of speakers who are from healthcare professionals. So I give the floor now, this will be a joint intervention, I give the floor to Tjalling van der Schors from the European Association of Hospital Pharmacists, and also to Ilaria Passarini, who is from the Pharmaceutical Group of the European Union. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. First of all, I want to compliment EMA on organizing this meeting. And thank you very much for providing me with the opportunity to share the views of both community and hospital pharmacists on COVID-19 vaccines and their role in the development and administration process. Some of the points that I raise fall outside the remit of the EMA, but I would like to touch on them nevertheless. I would like to start by highlighting that the challenges will not be over once one or several vaccines have been authorized for use in the EU. The administration process for the COVID-19 vaccine will be equally challenging. Since the beginning of the COVID-19 crisis, pharmacists have been working with tireless commitment and determination to guarantee patients continued access to treatments. Community pharmacists have been accessible 24/7 also during the lockdown and have arranged home delivery services for the most vulnerable people. Hospital pharmacists, together with other healthcare professionals, attended daily to the needs of Europe's COVID-19 patients in hospitals, providing treatments despite serious shortages. Throughout the crisis, pharmacists in the communities have been the first line of advice, treatment and referral for many European citizens on common ailments, successfully preventing unnecessary visits to emergency rooms. We strongly encourage national governments to make use of the widely accessible network of pharmacies across Europe to assist in efficient immunization strategies and broaden vaccination opportunities. At the point of administration, primarily, there will have to be good logistics in place for both goods and persons receiving the vaccine. Equally important is the record keeping for several reasons. Mass vaccination will be a challenge in itself, especially with different vaccines. Some of the vaccines in the approval process require the administration of an additional dose. The timing between doses can vary per vaccine. Thus, registration of which person receives which vaccine and which dose of the vaccine is paramount. The setting up and utilization of a database, preferably linked to a personal health environment, will be essential for monitoring pharmacovigilance and adherence as well as for other purposes, such as batch-level registration for side effects, monitoring, and recalls. Such a database could be useful also for much-needed research purposes. To facilitate this process, the use of scannable codes on the primary packaging is indispensable. A scannable code on the vial should be part of the quality requirement of the vaccine, as it is not only the product that is important, but also the way it is used and the follow-up. Vaccination records should be an integral part of the medication record, so they can be used throughout the healthcare system. Pharmacists and trained healthcare professionals and a trusted source. Pharmacists are trained healthcare professionals and trusted source of information. They can play a role in identifying patients in at-risk groups, such as elderly, patients with chronic diseases, immunocompromised, and others, and increasing public confidence in vaccination. The knowledge and expertise of pharmacists should be utilized in the planning and execution of COVID-19 vaccination programs. As all healthcare providers, they should be included in the priority access groups for the vaccine. So thank you for your attention, and I give the word back to you, Noel.
Thank you very much, Sterling. Yes, of course, healthcare professionals, including pharmacists, will play a very important role in the rollout of this of the whole vaccination campaign. And I can assure you that we pay a lot of attention at the level of the EMA in our discussions with the network, with the regulatory agencies of the member states in terms of how to address the specific elements that you have just elaborated upon. Thank you. So we move on now to Angeliki Ladia from the private geriatric clinic Evangelistria in Greece. Angeliki?
Good afternoon from Athens. Can you hear me?
Good afternoon, we can hear you.
Okay. Let me tell you our concerns about our patients. It's without doubt that older people and those with pre-existing medical conditions, such as diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease, lung disease, or cancer, appear to develop serious illness from COVID-19 more often than the others. In our clinic, that patients suffer from severe chronic diseases and geriatric syndromes, this danger is higher. According to ECDC and Greek Ministry of Health guidelines, visits have been banned since March. Consequently, geriatric relatives or carers have not seen or touched their beloved ones for months. On the other hand, the technology, safety and efficacy of COVID-19 vaccines and vaccines in general are scientific aspects unfamiliar to the public. So, it is important for us that EMA should take into consideration how to convince them, and that's the biggest challenge if vaccination is not obligatory, how to convince them to vaccinate their geriatric patients despite the widely spread controversial opinions about the vaccine itself and their psychological burden. I would also like to talk about a more practical aspect. EMA should take into special consideration the procedure that geriatric population is going to be vaccinated, since this frail population in majority cannot walk or even move. In my opinion, as a pharmacist, clinics, hospitals, healthcare professionals might help by participating in the procedure. Why don't we trust them? Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. I think your points about the specific needs of the geriatric population are very well taken. Of course, in relation to the vaccination programs at member state level, you know, this is not EMA responsibility, but we see from overall that, of course, a lot of attention is being paid in order to vaccinate the geriatric population as one of the first. We move on now to Tiago Villanueva from the European Union of General Practitioners and Sally Kendall, European Forum for Primary Care, and it will be again be a joint intervention. Over.
Good afternoon from Lisbon. Primary healthcare has been at the front line of the pandemic from the outset. GPs or family physicians and the primary care team have managed more than 90% of cases of COVID-19, namely those that are mild or moderate and that can be managed in the outpatient setting. That involved assessing patients face-to-face in COVID assessment centers or hot hubs and following up infected patients via telemedicine while also trying to maintain care to non-COVID patients as much as possible. GPs and nurses have also paid a heavy price for their exposure and commitment to the communities of patients they serve. The death toll of primary care professionals during the pandemic is enormous. And according to the International Council of Nursing, more nurses worldwide have now died from COVID-19 as in the First World War, and many worked in primary and community care. The death toll among GPs includes a 28-year-old GP in Spain. General practice and primary care in general are ideally placed to provide a major role in vaccination for COVID-19 across Europe due to their long-standing experience and expertise in delivering nationwide vaccination programs. However, there are doubts whether primary care has the adequate infrastructure to maintain the cold chain and deliver vaccines that have significant storage requirements, such as the Pfizer vaccine. So it may be more feasible for primary care to administer other vaccines that offer less logistical constraints, and we will therefore need clear implementation pathways. There will be even greater challenges for primary healthcare in rural and remote areas. GPs and nurses will be pivotal to instill confidence in their patients about the COVID-19 vaccines, since patients turn to primary care as their first point of contact, and we are often the most trusted by patients. GPs, nurses, and other primary healthcare workers, including pharmacists, know our patients very well and are thus ideally placed to adjust our communication to the patient's level of health literacy. But in turn, we need to be well briefed about vaccines and have easy access to high quality and clearly reported scientific information from, for example, EMA or the ECDC, but also from other trustworthy sources in order to be able to accurately inform our patients and answer their ongoing questions and concerns about the vaccines, including explaining the meaning of emergency approval or conditional marketing authorization for a COVID-19 vaccine. All primary care staff must have access to education and the same level of knowledge and skill to ensure that optimal uptake is achieved. This requires rapid action, including on part of the regulators, to ensure that the scientific evidence is available in a readily accessible format, including e-learning, that it is acceptable, used, and transferable to the community being vaccinated. This includes the understanding of risk-benefit to the individual and the population in order to provide strong messaging to tackle vaccine hesitancy and resistance. It also requires a workforce who are familiar with shared decision-making, human rights, and the jurisdiction of the country of delivery. It will be essential to have the summary of product characteristics, data, and product liability properly sorted out, as primary healthcare staff needs to be fully indemnified. We also recommend that EMA adopts a frequently asked questions approach in Europe to ensure a consistent, coherent message, and this needs to be in plain English or other language equivalents. We are also in a good position to assess the real-time effectiveness of the vaccine and notify any major adverse events with appropriate digital technology in place to ensure rapid and accurate reporting. Finally, if GPs and the primary care workforce are well informed and have confidence in the whole regulatory process for COVID-19 vaccines, then our patients will be more likely to take up the vaccine. Thank you.
Thank you, Tiago. And First of all, I think we have to thank all healthcare professionals for the really crucial role that they have played so far in the pandemic, be it at hospitals, being it pharmacies, being it in the nursery homes, etc. And of course, healthcare professionals will remain one of the important pillars also through the rollout of the vaccination campaign. And as you correctly stressed, it is of utmost importance that EMA, together with the national competent authorities, provide the most up-to-date and adequate information so that they can continue to fulfill their role throughout this very challenging process. We move on now to Sandra Alexiou, who is from the Bucharest Association for Family Doctors. Sandra?
Hello, and thank you for the floor. As expected, most of today's statements and questions in the chat are about the COVID-19 vaccine safety and patient safety. My statement comes along together with my practical point of view. I am also a family doctor, as before, and in my country...
Sandra, sorry to intervene. Your sound is breaking up.
Yes.
Can you try again?
Yes, probably the internet connection is not very well.
It's a little bit better now, so try again.
My video doesn't work, unfortunately. I'm trying to again.
Okay.
Do you hear me?
It's sound is breaking up. Sandra, I propose that we move to the next speaker and that you try to reconnect. If that's okay, Juan, can I ask you for your...
I'm okay, I'm connected and I'm hearing you very well.
Oh, okay, let's try again, Sandra. Let's try again.
If you think I can stop my video and maybe it's better?
It's a little bit better. Let's continue.
Okay. So
is it worth, Sandra, is it worth turning your video off? Sometimes that improves the sound, Sandra.
That's what I did. So can you hear me? Okay.
It's better. Let's try it like that, Sandra. Go ahead.
Sorry for the inconvenience.
No
I was told you I'm also a family doctor, as Tia before, and as expected, most of today's statements and questions in the chat are about COVID-19 patients, vaccine safety and patient safety. My statement comes along together with my practical point of view. I'm a family doctor. In my country, the majority of the vaccines are given by us, the family doctors. In my experience, together with my expertise in vaccinology, all along with my colleagues, microbiologists, infection disease specialists, epidemiologists, pneumologists, pediatricians, we should always see the patient not only through the theoretical eyes, but also through the clinical experience with practical points of view. This is why, in my opinion, it's important that medicine's regulatory authorities should also have in mind review the following 4 points. The first one, about the transplacental transfer of post-vaccine antibodies and the degree of protection given to the newborn. Will pregnant women be vaccinated as we do with using Tdap? Or if data about vaccinating in pregnancy are not available, will there be a recommendation for the conception vaccination? I think future approaches will need to clarify whether the protection developed by vaccinated women may be useful for future pregnancy. The second one, given the process of immunosenescence or aging, the vaccination of the elderly, the most targeted risk category in some countries, will require a particular schedule with more doses or the succession of 2 different types of vaccines as stated in pneumococcal vaccination, for example. The data provided should take into account the phenomenon of immunosenescence. The third one, in our activity, we use safety guidelines, communication guidelines, and general guidelines to build national vaccination schedules, catch-up schedules. In the case of COVID-19 vaccines, the general principles of vaccination should be maintained, Otherwise, trust will be seriously shaken. If there are exceptions or peculiarities related to vaccination against COVID-19, then they should be carefully communicated to avoid misconceptions. And the fourth one, the effectiveness of the vaccine conditioned by previous exposure to virus. Is it an issue? If testing before vaccination is necessary, then regulation concerning the types of tests and timing should be carefully specified. I would like to thank you for accepting my statement in this public transparent debate. I'm deeply honored and I'm happy to live in a historical moment in which humanity is struggling with the threat so difficult to anticipate and control. And I'm really a part of the US debate in the first prevention solutions to COVID-19. Practically, the shining star at the end of our tunnel.
Thank you, Sandra. Yes, we will anyway publish all the statements later on. If I'm not mistaken, I will need some confirmation here. You have raised a number of points which are already partly addressed in the slide deck which were presented. Marco, is there anything you would like to add to what you have mentioned before?
Yeah, no, thanks. If I understood correctly, one point was around immunosenescence, and I have to say that we will be scrutinizing the data indeed in the elderly above 70, 75 years of age. But you may have seen already in the publication that came out today on the New England Journal of Medicine for the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine efficacy trial, that the efficacy appears to be maintained very high also in the elderly above 65 and above 75 years of age. Of course, there was not a large number of cases, but still that is extremely reassuring. And a very similar message was coming from the somehow smaller data set published for the AstraZeneca vaccine. So the emerging data would show that differently than with the influenza vaccines that we have available now, this vaccine seems to be protecting the elderly, including those above 70, 75 years of age, more or less to the same extent that younger adults. And then I think with respect to pregnancy, to go back also to what said before, of course, we need to assess all the data that will be submitted, including from preclinical model, before we can really understand whether vaccination in pregnancy would be recommended at this point in time. Because indeed it's also important not to forget that in most of these clinical trials, pregnant women were excluded. So we don't have yet data in pregnant women with respect to the safety and the efficacy. And we will look forward to understanding the post-approval phase, what can be done in order to generate data in this important vulnerable group. And as Peter said, there will be the option of setting up registry that will look specifically into that. I think we already covered before the point of the one that were already exposed to the virus. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. And thank you, Sandra, for raising these points. So we'll move on then to Oli Weiss-Bjerum from the European Hematology Association. Oli?
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the invitation to this open event and the previous presentations. This presentation is on behalf of the EHA, the European Hematology Association. And blood disorders are diagnosed across ages and are benign or malignant, but treatment may be curative. However, the disease or treatment may cause patients to be at high risk for infections due to immune deficiency. And the corona setting is a hazard to clinical trials and the development of novel treatments. EMA has a role advising and assessing results of clinical trials carried out during the pandemic, which may have had an impact on the conduct and how to manage methodological issues or statistical problems. Now, it's an issue going forward if vaccination is allowed during the trials. EMA reports have already addressed some of these problems, and that is appreciated. The expectations on therapy to boost the effect of basic precautions involves the access to drugs for treatment and vaccines for prevention. The product information and the EPA represents an official source of information complementary to scientific publications. Expectations pertaining detailed informations routinely included in these documents are expected, and the rapid development of several vaccines and with different qualities may offer an individualized approach to patients. Also, the information on special assay techniques and interpretation of antibody response as biomarkers, considering the need to revaccinate later or to document immunization are relevant. The authorization of drugs and repurposing of marketed agents to treat COVID-19 are equally important for high-risk patients and personnel at risk, because subjects may not have received vaccines for various reasons. The concern for mutations in coronavirus is perhaps minimal to render vaccines less effective, but represents a potential risk. It is not known how the vaccines will perform across patient groups with temporary or permanent immune deficiency. The expertise in EMA'S is vital to support and communicate the post-marketing registration of adverse events, as we have heard, and also in subgroups in a transparent way. Healthcare professionals, of course, have an obligation to report the implementation of drugs and vaccines for COVID-19. Study groups in EHA has established fora for disease-specific projects in COVID and has developed educational material for the dissemination of knowledge. This information is publicly available at the EHA website, the ehaweb.org, and this activity will be extended with information going forward from EMA. Now, to close, the endeavor in the European Task Force is appreciated as a multidisciplinary forum, and the EHA points of view are likely shared by other medical specialties treating patients at risk. Therefore, EHA looks forward to work together with other disciplines and with EMA in a COVID context to learn. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Oli, for this useful information and also your commitment to continue working with us. Is there anything, for instance, Marco, that you would like to add to what you already presented and addressed in subsequent interventions? Or Fergus?
Not from my side, Noel.
Okay, thank you. Then we move on now to the next group, which are the academia, and I first pass the floor to Nicolas Dietis from the University of Cyprus. Nicolas, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. So first of all, I would like to convey our warm congratulations to everyone at the agency and outside of the agency for organizing this event and for taking the wise decision to inform the European citizens and ask for feedback. We believe that asking for feedback is the first part of building trust between parties, but the second part, which is equally important, is what does one do with the feedback received? So how is one going to integrate important pieces of this feedback into one's decision-making process? And of course, communicating this output back to the public. So we would very much like to see this happening here. Listening to the intervention so far, one can understand that there is a high degree of overlapping points, such as the concerns regarding the safety of the COVID vaccines, the expectations of transparency in the approval process, and the value of accurate communication to the public regarding the benefit of these vaccines. So in order to save time, I won't go over the same points myself, but I would like to highlight just 3 important points. The first point is the quality of information provided in the approval decision documentation of the agency to the public and the health professionals. The quality of information. Looking at the bad example of the MHRA documentation for the vaccine, for the Pfizer vaccine in the UK, we wouldn't like to see similar limited information in EMA's decision. We know that there are limited data in vaccine trials for certain populations. We know that there are unanswered questions about a vaccine's efficacy to avert infections. Repeating these unknowns in the approval decision document won't help health professionals or the public. We need to know for each of these unknowns what is the agency's recommendations. We trust the agency and we trust the high standards of the approval process, but we need to see all of these points translated to explicit, clear and concise recommendations and risk-benefit assessments by the agency. A simple sentence like, talk to your doctor before taking the vaccine if you are in this population or the other, won't do the full job, because medical doctors don't have access to all the data in order to make the right decision for their patients, which brings me actually to my second point. Access to all the information and data included in a company's application for approval. Not only that of clinical trials, but also those in preclinical phases. This is not just an issue of transparency and openness. Access to data provides the tools and ammunition to scientists in order to make assessments and critical appraisals, using this knowledge to convey simple and clear messages to the public. Science communication is very powerful in times of emergency. Scientists and academics, such as myself, communicate with the public daily, answering questions, addressing concerns. We cannot do this efficiently for the benefit of society if our information is based just on the company's media statement or scientific paper with limited information. So it would be very positive to have access to the rolling review data and reports and the conditional marketing authorization data. Finally, I would like to emphasize the post-approval surveillance system, and I thank Peter for addressing this in his presentation. But we know that some EU countries have limited national surveillance systems, not just for safety issues, but also for efficacy data, such as the duration of protection. We will be gathering real-world data on a vaccine's performance, so we need to oversee national systems that will be used for safety and efficacy monitoring. We need the highest European standards implemented in the national surveillance systems in each EU country. We need to know how quickly can these systems inform the EMA and the companies in order to take swift action. And finally, we need to know how will the ECDC and the EMA work together over these surveillance systems in order to inform efficiently the public about the safety and efficacy. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Nicolas. And I think you have a very well elaborated message highlighting all the different aspects that need to be addressed. It shows once again the very complex challenge that we all have to face, not only in authorizing these vaccines, also in following up these vaccines, in the transparency, and as I mentioned at the beginning, and in building and maintaining that the trust of everyone in throughout the overall process. So thank you very much for highlighting this. And finally, I move on to Carlos Alberto Guzman from the Helmholtz Center for Infection Research in Germany. Carlos?
Thank you very much. The exceptional emergency needs deriving from the current pandemic have resulted in an unprecedented pace for the development and rollout of COVID-19 vaccines. This had created an avoidable knowledge gap as well as potential risk, as the Federation of European Pharmaceutical Industries and Association pointed out. In this regard, there are two key aspects requiring particular attention. First, we need a worldwide comprehensive and long-lasting pharmacovigilance program to assess safety and efficacy parameters. This program should be tightly coupled to pre-established workflows to enable rapid reaction and adjustment of vaccine implementation policies, as well as to secure optimal matching between available vaccines and subpopulation group of vaccinees, according to an optimal risk-benefit balance. This program needs to take into account the probably unavoidable crossover of volunteers enrolled in the placebo group of the phase 3 trials. After hearing Emma's presentation, I'm confident that we are on the right track, but more needs to be done to ensure proper implementation, and we need transparency, probably new rules, to state in the information that particular side effects will be observed with frequencies that are higher than 1 out of 10 vaccines is probably not okay for vaccine where we're expecting. This in 1 out of 2 or 3 vaccines. Second, we should very critically assess the potential administration of vaccines to children who are not at high risk for severe forms of COVID-19. This is particularly important considering the ongoing vaccine trials that even when finished will be unable to provide evidence for extremely rare or long-term adverse events. This is even more imperative taking into account that the conditional marketing authorization by definition will be based on an informed forecast of middle, long-term vaccine efficacy and safety. Even though modeling may suggest the apparent strategic advantage resulting from vaccinating children first, these methods are not yet able by design to take into account unknown age-specific risks for delay or rare adverse event. There are good reasons to expect that young vaccinees will display a different risk pattern than other age groups because of their immunoresponsiveness profile. We need to learn from previous experiences like the influenza pandemic of 2009, where unexpected, rare, serious adverse events were observed even for well-known vaccines developed with standard technology, namely not first-in-class technologies. There is an ethical conundrum in accepting the exposure of children to potential danger by offering protection against a disease that represents for them a comparative minimal threat in order to reduce risk for other individuals who can be directly protected by those vaccines, in particularly considering the entity of the potential long-term burden for the vaccinees, the healthcare system, and the whole society. EMA can contribute by fine-tuning the degree of stringency during evaluation, the endpoint required for efficacy, and the way in which is implemented or not a conditional versus full marketing authorization. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Carlos, and also thank you for reminding us about the fact that we need a very robust post-authorization safety and effectiveness monitoring phase, as was already highlighted before. Now, we have all been doing very well in terms of, not only in terms of providing very useful statements and comments and raising your concerns, but also in timekeeping. So we have much more time now for additional questions for those persons who have not yet reached out to us. We have, in fact, 3 sets of possible comments. So we have persons who are in the WebEx room who can either raise their hands or write to us in the chat box. And then we have also quite a lot of viewers still from outside who can send their comments to the dedicated mailbox. So we'll do it in such a way that each time we go first to the persons raising their hands, then we take a person who has written in the chat box, and then we also, as a next step, then take somebody who has sent in a comment from outside who's watching live. And my colleague, Joan Garcia Burgos, Head of Public and Stakeholder Engagement, will help me in trying to multitask and reading the contributions, and then of course we will address that with the panel that is available. So, Juan, I hand over to you now in terms of collecting the necessary questions.
Thank you very much, Noel, and good afternoon, everybody. So we'll try to provide all the questions we are receiving. Just to let you know, we have received from the inbox, which allows people who are outside following via broadcast. We have received more than 100 questions. So we will try to select them as much as we can. And the rest, we will try to provide an answer, a written answer, as we are trying to group them. Some of them refer to some of common issues. So I understand everyone is familiarized. So there is an icon in the list of participants for those who are in the WebEx, following with the WebEx. So you can raise your hand, and we will be giving the floor to each of you. So maybe we can start by reading some of the questions that we have internally. And for example, we have Jose from IPOPI, who was referring to the need to promote eudravigilance and the need to really how to ensure that eudravigilance is make more the public is more aware of this tool. which is a database for storing all the safety information we get from the vaccines. Then we have a question about Cinead, who was asking about what is the endpoint. And I don't know, maybe Noel or colleagues, whether you want to clarify on that.
Endpoint in terms of what? Sorry.
The question was asking, can you explain to everyone what is an endpoint when we are talking about an endpoint in clinical trials?
Okay, I put that one to Marco.
Yes, thank you. So indeed, the endpoint are the objective of the clinical trial. So what the clinical trials is aiming to demonstrate and how is designed also in statistical term in order to achieve that endpoint. And indeed, there is the primary endpoint, which is the primary goal of the study, and the entirety in the sample side and statistical consideration are around demonstration of efficacy for that endpoint. But there are also secondary endpoints that are also important, but of course not as important, and will be addressed as other aspects that will show what is the efficacy of the vaccine. I hope that this clarifies.
Thank you, Marco. Peter, you would like to, or Fergus, to add something about Eutravigilance and to make it more visible to the general public?
I'm happy to comment. I think and thanks, Jose, for raising it. Clearly, Eutravigilance is an enormously powerful tool for monitoring the safety of all medicines on the European market. And as I emphasized in my presentation, all citizens, all patients, all healthcare professionals can report a side effect at any time, and they should report those side effects to the national competent authority or to the manufacturer of the medicine. And there's information in all patient leaflets on how to report, and also on EMA's website and national websites. In terms of promoting Eutravigilance, I would understand that to be promoting reporting of adverse drug reactions on the one side, but also then promoting use of the transparency measures with Eutravigilance, where people can go to the website and look at the reports of suspected adverse drug reactions, which are anonymized, but are presented in quite some detail. So you can look at the different profiles of reactions, you can look for the cardiovascular reactions, the hematological reactions, the skin reactions, all this sort of thing that have been reported. And that can be very informative in terms of, well, particularly as a complement to looking at the information in a patient leaflet. So I think, Jose, it's a really good point, and promotion of ADR reporting is critical. I totally agree.
Perhaps, Peter, if I can add, because it's also the comment from Ansela appearing, is how taken into account that unlike the flu vaccines that are given to patients who then go often to their GPs in order to get vaccinated, this will now be organized differently. So perhaps it's something to see how we can make sure that the stimulating, encouraging people in order to report side effects, in order, of course, to get an as good overview of the side effects during the rollout of the vaccination, how that can be further facilitated.
Yes, and just to say that one of the strengths of the European regulatory network is that it works as a network. And within the Pharmacovigilance Risk Assessment Committee here at the EMA, all member state national competent authorities are represented, and discussions on how to support national information campaigns, accessibility of reporting forms, be they apps or online or in paper or telephone lines, have been going on within the European regulatory network with sharing of best practice, and that will continue right through 2021.
And this is also something that we can further discuss with the national authorities of the member states, so that can be further facilitated. Okay, back to you, Kuan, for the next set of questions.
Thank you very much. So we have a set of questions, and I'm trying to group them, which are asking the same topic. And the questions are referring to the recent approval in the UK for the vaccine, and also the recent developments in the US and in Health Canada. And they're asking, based on this background, why EMA is presenting this delay with its regulatory decision on the COVID-19 vaccine from Pfizer. is that indeed based on a benefit risk assessment? So the question is whether we can clarify why we have not taken a decision yet.
But I think that is a bit, I can take that one as already was explained, I think, by both Marco and by Fergus. What we are looking into is the fact that the EMA or the EU, if I can put it like that, because the EMA will give a scientific recommendation to the European Commission, who will transform that scientific recommendation in a binding decision for the whole of the EU. This is a marketing authorization. What has happened so far in other regions or in other countries, such as UK, also Canada, and most likely also the US shortly, is a kind of a temporary permit in order to distribute and use the vaccine of an unlicensed vaccine. There may still be a license coming up later on, but that is not yet the case at this moment in time. And as was already explained by the previous speakers, as part of the process for a conditional marketing authorization, where we try to combine the fact that not to be quick, we try to be as efficient as possible, is a word that I would rather prefer, whilst maintaining the fact that we need to be robust in the decision making, and that we need to look at the evidence which is being provided by the companies concerned. At that moment in time, we take indeed a decision which is based on the benefit of vaccination against the risk that a vaccine may have in terms of a certain amount of side effects. And we should also not forget, when we give a marketing authorization, that's a marketing authorization which is available for all batches that will come on the European market. Unlike, for instance, what has recently happened at the level of the UK, where a specific batch approval has been given, and any further approval in the context of this temporary permit will still be batch specific. So it will still remain batch specific approvals. And that's why we need to be certain when we give a marketing authorization that also aspects as upscaling, etc., have been carefully looked into. And that is why it's a different legal tool that we will be using, combined with efficiency and at the same time also robustness. Over.
Thank you very much, Noel, for the clarification. So we are going to give the floor to Marco Greco, who is in the WebEx.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Juan. Thank you, Noel. I just want to make a quick comment. First, let me acknowledge the fact that organizing this kind of meeting during a pandemic with all the pressure on the agency is an extra workload that as patients organization we do appreciate a lot. Thank you for having opened the doors of the agency today and for being very clear and direct in your communication. The situation is for sure unprecedented, particularly because this is coming also in a moment that was already quite difficult when it comes to vaccine acceptancy, and now the vaccine seems to be the only solution that we have. Noel mentioned a few moments ago how essential is engagement in this context, and I cannot agree more. So far, we trust and we ask EMA to keep this channel of communication open. Transparency is essential for communicating trust to the public and to the patients out there. So it is essential for us to know that this channel of communication will remain open, will stay there, particularly if some problem will arise. It is essential for us to know that the agency will work together with us in order to grant the safety of all patients. In this sense, I would like to stress the fact that signaling from patients has to be accessible, simple, efficient, and patients have the right to see this happening and the data they will provide correctly valued by the agency and by the agency experts. Finally, it is essential for chronically ill patients to know that the agency will keep an eye on the potential risks of interaction with the essential therapies that every chronically ill patient has to undergo every day. These, as you know, will create a differentiation in the possibility of accessing it, because depending on which vaccine will be approved before, may make a change for different patient cohorts. I don't stress here the issues of product liability, but I want also to close by saying that this is an historical turning point, particularly for the challenges represented by vaccine hesitation. So the EMA role is essential, and we hope that this will be also a moment in which we will show that working together will make a difference. No other agency has organized a meeting like this, and we hope these will continue in the next month. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. And in fact, today is not the end of the journey. Today is the start of the journey. And as I said at the beginning, it's very important that we build and that we maintain trust throughout the process. It doesn't stop at the moment that a marketing authorization is granted, being it conditional or being it full. That doesn't matter that much. The moment that we say this vaccine is okay in order to be rolled out to the general population in the EU, we have a duty in order to make sure that we maintain that level of transparency and that level of engagement with the general public. And we have taken the initiative in order to organize this public workshop, and that will have to be followed on by other workshops. So certainly once we have given an approval for a vaccine, we will then have to see, okay, is there further information that we have to provide? Should we organize yet another workshop so that the general public, if they have particular questions in relation to that vaccine for which we have given a conditional marketing authorization, and that those questions have to be addressed, we will do so. As I said, it's part of the exercise we have to do to build and to maintain trust throughout the process, which then in turn, hopefully, will lead to the anxiety of the persons being diminished in a higher vaccination rate and an easier way in order to battle the pandemic and to get rid as much as possible of the COVID-19 virus. Over to you, Juan.
Thank you very much. We are going to read now a internal comment from Teodora Ivanova, and she is referring to the presentation from Marco, and he's asking for a clarification or a comment regarding the studies, the non-clinical studies, which where Marco said that will make sure that the vaccine does not cause any fertility problems or that it will affect the baby. And she's referring to Pfizer's information in relation to the FDA event yesterday, where they said that such data is not available in the candidate vaccine. So maybe Marco or Noel would like to clarify on that.
I hand over to Marco.
Yeah, of course, it's very difficult for us to comment while evaluation is ongoing, but our expectation is that data will be generated and we'll be in the position to review them. And of course, the review of these preclinical studies are just the first step in understanding the positive benefit risk that potentially could be in pregnant women. And as said, this is something that we will have to discuss with the sponsor and understand after the potential approval what other evidence will be needed in order to make sure that we have a good understanding of whether these vaccines will be safe in pregnant women, how can they be used, including one of the questions that was put before around the potential also of protecting the newborn in the first months of life.
Go on.
Thank you very much. So we'll go now to one of the questions received from Bert Erwell, and she's asking to clarify, she's asking EMA to clarify how these recommendations are being rolled out in the population. Exactly, she's asking who should be vaccinating first. Is EMA going to give any recommendation whether old people or any other population should be given priority when vaccinating? Will this be part of the assessment?
Perhaps I can start, and if Marco or anyone else would like to intervene. I think we have to make a distinction, and I don't want to sound bureaucratic at all, but of course, the vaccination programs are still they are member state responsibility. So each member state will decide, taking into account the available vaccines, particular issues such as logistics that have to be addressed, storage conditions, etc. Each member state will decide at that moment in time what is the best way to proceed. Also availability, because it's not a situation like all the vaccines will be available at the same moment in time. That is not going to be the case. So particular choices will have to be made. What is important, however, is that the agency is as clear as possible in terms of this vaccine will do what? What is the level of efficacy? What type of side effects do we know at this moment in time? How can the vaccine being stored? So that the logistical consequences can be carefully considered, etc. So this is, in this respect, we are currently liaising. We have now weekly meetings with the network of the regulatory authorities of the member states in order to see how can we facilitate the rollout at the national level of these vaccines. So what can we do in order to help? That has nothing to do with the scientific evaluation, which is of course conducted by our scientific committee, but all the other aspects, and some of them have been highlighted today, that it is important to know what is the population that has been studied in the clinical trials. Have elderly been included or not? What is the recommendation of the committee in this particular respect? Are there certain parts of the population that have to be excluded? Remember the discussion about the UK with the 2 cases of side effects, and also the discussion yesterday at the level of the FDA at the advisory group. So it is important that we give the right information, as much as information, so that the decision making at national level in terms of the rollout of the vaccination programs can be made. Marco, you would like to add?
No, thanks, Noel. Again, fully support what you said. And just to add that indeed the role of the EMA as a regulatory agency is to establish where there is a positive benefit risk, and that will be part of the deliberation. Then how the vaccine will be deployed and which group will be prioritized, that is a decision that is taken by the public health authority in each member state. And we are in dialogue also with the NITA group, which is the group of the National Immunization Technically Advisory Group, which are the group at the level of the member states make recommendation on which population should be vaccinated first. And that's indeed, it will be their decision and not a decision of the EMA.
Thank you. So I suggest that we give the floor now to Christos Petru within the room. Christos, please.
I would like to thank the agency for organizing this meeting and opening the doors to the public to be informed in a transparent way on the vaccine development. There are a lot of concerns about the long-term effects of vaccines, and these concerns contribute to the skepticism on the vaccination value. Of course, short and long-term benefits of vaccination outweigh the complications caused by the natural infections and the risks of the disease. And of course, the same principle of risk-benefit balance must be applied on the possibility of adverse reactions with delayed onset. Phase 3 are not designed in general to detect very rare reactions or reactions with delayed onset. Post-authorization safety or efficacy studies will be imposed, of course, as a condition to the marketing authorization, and the applicants have to monitor the safety and efficacy of the vaccines in the long-term for the long-term effects. It is important to communicate to the public how the agency is going to organize such studies, or if it is going to leave it on a voluntary basis of the applicants, or there will be some plans from CGMP of the park about the PASS and the PAES studies. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter, do you would like, you already addressed it during your presentation, but do you would like to add?
Well, just maybe, thanks very much for the point. It's clearly very important. And actually the issue of long-term effects or delayed effects. So long-term, I understand, would be the duration that side effect would last, whereas delayed would mean it would only start a long time after vaccination. Clearly, these are very important and are areas where we need to focus particularly to make sure that we do have our eyes and ears open to detect them. Now, the spontaneous reporting systems that were in place potentially can detect them, but the problem is it requires the thought in someone's head, could this reaction be linked to a vaccination that took place many, many months before? What I can say is that as well as the companies putting in place specific studies, and they will be legal obligations placed on the companies at the time of authorization. I know some of the national competent authorities and public health authorities are putting in place studies, but also at a European level, after collaborative discussions between EMA, ECDC and the European Commission, specific safety studies will be put in place, which are at a European level, so multiple member states, and they'll be looking at the whole array of safety issues, including delayed effects, long-term effects, and they will be studies that will last at least 2 years. So I'm pleased to be able to say that today. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Juan?
Yes, I will now read a question from Dario Sanino, and he's asking very much on the concept which has been given that vaccine development for COVID-19 is being fast-tracked globally. So development is compressed in time, and it applies to extensive knowledge which is based on vaccine production gained over the many years and with existing vaccines. But he's asking about how is this a little bit possible, taking into account that mRNA is quite a new technology, or at least is not globally well known. How can we guarantee, or how can EMA guarantee that this new technology will not have a long-term impact in terms of safety and efficacy?
Marco, do you want to elaborate? Or Fergus?
I can maybe start. Yeah, indeed, it's a new technology, but we should not forget that clinical trials have been running since many years now, probably more than 20 years, with these technologies. So there is a little bit of knowledge already there, including in the long term. Of course, we don't have yet a vaccine that has been approved based on this technology. So no doubt we have much less experience than with other more traditional, I would say, technologies that have been employed in the past for vaccines. But this does not mean that we are really starting from scratch. And of course, so we have to look at the data as they come and at face value. And that's why it's important that this decision is taken based on the size of the data set that are submitted at the time of approval, and also incorporating quite robust tools for monitoring the post-approval, the benefit risk. But it's very difficult to say that here there are emerging risks with this technology, despite the obvious uncertainty that we are all have to acknowledge and to take into account. Probably that's all that can be said.
Fergus, you would like to add?
No, I think Marco said it very well, and obviously we need to continue to monitor very carefully with the studies that Peter has described, and with the ongoing follow-up of the existing clinical trials and new clinical trials that we will ask to be done. Thank you. And careful also monitoring of the quality of the products as well. That's important.
Perhaps I would also like to add that as part of the approval process, I mean, we have a very robust system with the necessary checks and balances. We are using the best expertise available in the European Union in order also from a quality part, from the quality side, to look into these applications, including the biologicals working party that is being consulted on this. So we're doing our utmost. Of course, the data have to be delivered by pharmaceutical industry, but in terms of the scrutiny of the data, we are using and even stepping up the expertise in order to look into all these areas, including the fact that this is a novel methodology, but as Marco mentioned, it's not that it is brand new, it is already in place for a number of clinical trials that have been running for other treatments before. Juan?
Thank you for clarifying. I'm going to now read a question which has been received from another member of the European Parliament, from Tilly Meth. She's asking several questions. The first is whether we would like to comment on the response from the European Commission regarding the possibility to have additional staff to support our work to deliver on COVID-19 vaccines. The second is asking a question which in a way has already been covered partially regarding older generation and whether these people should get the vaccines first, and also how EMA is ensuring that these populations are sufficiently represented in the clinical trials. She is asking as well, another question is asking as well about whether EMA can encourage clinical trials sponsor to make clinical trials protocols available as soon as possible. And she's also asking about whether there are further evaluation to be conducted in pregnant and lactating women.
Okay, I'll start with the first question, the second and the fourth for Marco, and the third for Fergus about the clinical trial. So in terms of the resources, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic has come just after the EMA was confronted with the Brexit consequences and the relocation from London to Amsterdam, and we were moving out of a business continuity exercise, and it has hit us again. So let's we should be clear about that. And the workload, of course, in this particular field, not only for the EMA, but also for the national competent authorities who are providing the necessary expertise, is very, very substantial. But that doesn't mean we are not engaged in this and that we don't put this as a top priority, both in terms of the scientific evaluations, as well in terms of transparency, as you have noticed today. So luckily, the European Commission has provided us with additional resource in order to take care of the COVID-19 workload increase. So that is good news, and that will help us to at least mitigate the difficulties that we were facing. Otherwise, we would have to further restrict a number of other activities, certainly not COVID-19, which will have the utmost priority for the EMA. So perhaps now, Marco, for questions 2 and 4, and then Fergus, the question in relation to the clinical trials.
Apologies, the line was breaking, so can you remind me what were the 2 questions?
Yeah, I can read them again. Yes. The first one is whether older generation will be given priority for vaccination, and also how we can ensure that these populations are sufficiently represented in clinical trials.
Okay, so on this question, of course, as said, the decision of who will get the vaccination is up to the individual member states and the competent public health authority. But we know already that indeed the elderly, particularly above the age of 70 or maybe even above 80 years of age, will definitely be one of the priority group for vaccination, for the simple reason that they are more at risk of death and severe COVID-19. And that's also one of the reasons why, when we discussed with manufacturers, we made clear the importance of recruiting sufficient number of elderly, both in the early clinical trials, exploring early safety and immunogenicity, but also in the later stage clinical trials that are aiming to establish the efficacy and the safety in this population more at large. And I can say that indeed we've seen efforts from the manufacturers to involve elderly in their clinical trials. So we were pushing for at least a quarter. Now we've seen in some cases that at least 20% of the subjects recruited in these studies are elderly above the age of 65, which of course is a good starting point for having a robust and reliable understanding of whether the efficacy in this patient population is different than in younger adults. And as said, we are really glad to see that, at least on the data that are already been made public, it appears that the efficacy is not different in the elderly than in younger adults.
Yeah, perhaps I can read now as well the other question, which was also related to Marco, which was asking regarding the further evaluation which will be conducted on pregnant women and also on lactating women, whether we can explain further this and how this is going to be translated into a specific recommendation for use when the vaccine is given to these women.
Yeah, that's a very important point. And as I mentioned before, it's very difficult for me to say much as the evaluation is ongoing, at least for those vaccines that are under rolling review and are more mature in terms of a potential decision from the EMA. But I absolutely concur that we should be very clear on what is the level of evidence at the time of authorization, and the product information should be very clear about all the uncertainties and unknown. It's difficult for me to say more or to predict exactly what will be the conclusion on this matter and what will be included as a recommendation. But definitely pregnant women are at risk of COVID-19 as well, and we should make sure that we have sufficient evidence to establish what is the benefit risk of this vaccine in that vulnerable group as well.
And then there was a question for you, Fergus.
Yes.
Do we need to repeat, or you got it?
I'll repeat, and you can add if I missed some of it. No, I understand the question was if EMA can publish the clinical trial protocols for the studies. It's not within our remit to publish the protocols of the ongoing trials, but you can find information on the EU clinical trial register for trials that would be running in Europe, or indeed clinicaltrials.gov from the US and other registers, giving quite good, still summary information, but quite good information about the protocols. And of course, when we publish the clinical study reports, as Melanie has explained, once the marketing authorization is in place and the personal data and CCI have been redacted, we'll publish those as soon as possible. And that also includes the clinical study protocol. Thank you. I believe I've covered Juan, yeah?
I think you have, yes. So maybe we can now give the floor to George Kargiolakis.
I have a couple of questions. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, very well.
Great. My first question regards the EMA, let's say, threshold for vaccine risks. What kind of risk is acceptable, let's say, when having an autoimmune disease like multiple sclerosis event in one of 100,000 doses, for example? And the second question is, do you expect any long-term safety issues that are not detected during the 2-month monitoring? What is the usual timeline needed for a vaccine for safety issues? Thank you.
Thank you. I think certainly to the second question we already elaborated upon. Peter, Marco, you want to, is there anything else you would like to add?
Well, I mean, clearly the first question is a really interesting question, and it's a question that comes down to benefit risk assessment. And as has been said repeatedly, the evaluation of the specific vaccines is ongoing, and we will talk publicly once that evaluation has been completed. But how to balance a potential benefit of preventing a serious and frequently fatal disease against very, very, very rare events, if they occur, that's the assessment job of the CHMP. That is at the core of the benefit risk assessment that they will be doing. And what we will ensure is that product information accurately reflects the data that have been submitted and the assessment of the CHMP, and we will have very, very high levels of transparency.
Okay, Juan?
Yes, I will read now one question in the chat from Thanos. I think somehow has been touched upon, but we can clarify. And it's asking, we are talking about benefit and risk, and eventually the agency will be giving a recommendation whether the benefit outweigh the risk of the vaccines. And he suggests, he's commenting that this is a very subjective rather than an objective element. So that how do we avoid optimism bias also in face of the crisis that we are now facing?
Sorry, Juan, can you repeat? I didn't get the question very well. My connection was not very good.
Sorry, the question is asking that we are talking about benefit and risk, and we expect that when the agency has seen all the data, we expect to be able to give a recommendation stating that the benefit of the vaccine outweighs the risk. So Fanos is suggesting, is commenting, this is a very subjective element rather than an objective one. So how EMA and the committee is going to avoid any kind of bias and optimism bias, as he put it?
Well, it's a benefit-risk evaluation has always been at the decision making of the EMA since 1995. So, as I referred to before, you have to weigh the benefits of vaccination against any possible risk in relation to that particular vaccine. And that will have to be taken, that decision will have to be taken on a case-by-case basis. For each vaccine, we have to have a look at the data that are submitted, and on that basis, the committee will decide if the benefits outweigh that particular risk for any of the populations that are being proposed by the pharmaceutical company. I don't know if anyone from the other panelists would like to add to what I just mentioned.
Noel, just a brief comment, because you're absolutely right. Benefit risk is absolutely at the core of the evaluation. Just to say, over probably 20 years, but certainly accelerated over the last 10 years, the CHMP, so this is the Committee on Human Medicinal Products, which takes the opinion on the benefits and risks of the vaccines, has had an intensive program of work on benefit risk methodology to try and ensure that the benefit risk assessment is data driven and objective, and that it has a structured approach so that it becomes less and less subjective and more objective, and also that benefit risk assessment is then reflected in a structured way in the European Public Assessment Report, so people can see the weights that were given to different benefits and different risks in that assessment. The concept of optimism bias, I think, is very important. Everybody wants to have an effective, safe vaccine to end this horrible pandemic. And so I think the point is well taken. I mean, if I just go with the published results, if we're really talking about 95% efficacy, then I think sort of subtle bias in the assessment is then less relevant, because that kind of level of efficacy, if that is confirmed in the assessment, is really, really high efficacy and would suggest that at a population level, there are enormous benefits. Over.
Thank you, Peter. Juan?
Yes, thank you very much. We have a question which is asking, it's about all vaccine candidates that are now being evaluated, has been seen to report some kind of disease enhancement after vaccination. At least this has been seen in animal models. And they were asked to comment on whether this is being taken into account or whether any evidence has been seen in humans or in clinical models. So maybe we can comment on this.
I suppose that's for you, Marco, again.
Yeah, thanks for this question. Indeed, this is something that we took very seriously right from the start, and we were extremely concerned when we saw this preclinical data for MERS and SARS, so SARS-CoV-1, so the SARS of many years ago, that there was this potential risk, even if theoretical, because it's never seen in humans anyway, even with those two viruses. Still, it has been important really to put in place a number of requirements from preclinical model in order to try to understand if a similar risk could be seen also with SARS-CoV-2. And now what I can say is that in all these animal models, nothing really came out that would show any concern similar to what we're seeing with the other coronaviruses. So far, at least from a preclinical perspective, it looks like all the vaccines that have been tested and have gone into clinical trials have not shown any potential risk of enhancement of disease. Say that, still, it's very important that we continue monitoring for that theoretical occurrence in the long run, because as we know, once the antibodies tend to go down over time, maybe this risk could be increased. And that's one of the reasons why we all felt very important that the randomized clinical trials could continue in the long run, because they will provide really important evidence with respect to this potential safety aspect, which in my view probably is the most relevant one in the long term with the COVID-19 vaccine, for what we can say. So we really hope that that will be possible and we will be able to rule out this occurrence. But of course, we need to be vigilant and to make sure that we have the adequate tools to spot whether this might occur. Over.
Thank you, Marco. Juan?
So we give the floor now to Christos Leonis within the room.
Oh, thank you very much. Very much appreciate giving the chance in a few words in explaining how important is to enhancing the capacity of general practitioners, primary care physicians, not only just to translate the evidence and the interpretation of the results of randomized controlled trials into recommendation, but also in training them effectively in communication skill and especially in behavior change. I think that at the moment across settings, unfortunately, primary care physicians in many circumstances are not so capable in reading the evidence, translate it in sampling words, and utilizing effective motivational to communicate effectively and convince the patients. I think that across settings, it is very important in strengthening this issue. And also, and the last point is, I'm talking from the University of Crete, Greece, and also as a member of expert panel of the European Commission. And I think that it is important in utilizing this, if you say, chance for vaccination, in enhancing further the primary care and giving the opportunity to primary care practitioners in checking doubly the vaccination deficiencies of the people they are addressing. There are many issues and chances that will have to be discussed. Oh, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for these comments. Is there any one who would like to further respond?
Maybe I can
just, Melanie, yes, please go ahead.
Just to say, thank you very much for the point. Indeed, as I highlighted or I touched on in my presentation, we are working very closely with healthcare professional organisations, including those in primary care, and we engage very regularly through our working party. We also have healthcare professionals represented in the pandemic task force, and one of the things that's so important for us, we produce a lot of material. We produce the prescribing information, we produce the European Public Assessment Report, which provides more information on the assessment process and the outcome of the evaluation. But it's very important for us to understand where the gaps are and what more we can do. So this is the sort of information, if you can provide us with what more would help you on a daily basis to communicate, we can certainly work on trying to meet that need. So thank you very much, and it's something we can take forward within the working group.
Yes, and I would reiterate that last point. I think we are a little bit in your hands as well. I mean, we'll try, of course, to do whatever we can as a European agency, acknowledging that, of course, there's also member states who are dealing or reaching out to you at the national level. So whatever we at the European level can do in order to help, we will, of course, certainly not be shy and not engage in that particular exercise. But it is important that perhaps we also get some feedback from you what you think we could do in order to further help. As already mentioned before that healthcare professionals will be very important in terms of conveying also the necessary measures of assurance and trust to the individuals who need to be vaccinated. Juan?
Thank you, Noel. I think we have time for one more question, and we can give the floor to Sinead Hewson. Please, Sinead.
Thank you for the time. First of all, I think today has been fantastic because as a consumer, it's very clear that there is a need for this dialogue. And what's really interesting is seeing in the chat the diversity of opinion that's there. But my question is actually about when we look at today, and I really liked the way the whole process was explained in very clear, plain English, and have to thank the team for that, and the fact that the decisions are being made based on data, not on external pressures. But I'm curious about how the diversity of the group that's here in the room with you and watching on YouTube, how we as consumers, and obviously there are professional organizations here as well, how to support you to enable to keep that objectivity in the decision and safety around the vaccines. But also, what is the one takeaway that you would like us to focus on? So, for example, I can hear my daughter singing in the background, and she's asking questions, and she's only 15, about whether a vaccine is safe or not for her. And I'd like to know, as a parent, what would be the one takeaway that in building trust that is important to focus on?
So perhaps, Melanie, I pass that one to you. You're a good communicator.
Yeah, thank you, Sinead. And as the mother of two teenagers, I can very much sympathise or recognise the question from the adolescents. And really, that's part of the reason of this public meeting. It's to hear different perspectives on what sort of questions are out there, and that will enable us to try and put those forward and tackle them head on. So, we come with what we think will be frequently asked questions and try to best guess, but often, we're very close to the data, and we have maybe our own preconceived conceptions. So this sort of dialogue, and as Noel mentioned, we will be continuing it on in the months and hopefully not the years to come on this pandemic, but certainly it will set the scene for how we engage not only with stakeholders but the public in the future. So I guess for us the take-home message is we want to hear from you what's more we can do. I mean, what would you like to see? What are the questions that you still feel are unanswered, or what are the points today where you feel we haven't quite got a grasp of it and we could do more? And that's the sort of feedback we would appreciate. And certainly, if you can let us know any additional comments you have, it's very, very welcome. Over.
Thank you. And with this, I would like now to come to the final part of today's event, is to wrap up with a number of messages. First of all, I would like to thank everyone, the whole team who has presented today, and the whole team who has made this possible. So all the colleagues from the stakeholder and communication division for preparing this, and also for following up on this, because it will not be finished. So thank you all very much for the great work done. I would, of course, also like to thank all of you, all the participants who have spent their time today with us, trying to learn from how we deal with it, how the vaccines are developed, how we authorize, what we plan to do in the post-authorization phase, how we can make sure that the quality, the safety, efficacy of the vaccines is being maintained throughout the whole life cycle of these vaccines, and of course the level of transparency. And we hope that the meeting today has provided you with a better understanding of the evaluation and the assessment and approval of COVID-19 vaccines in the EU. As you heard today, we are mobilizing resources and expertise across the EU network in an unprecedented way to fast-track all our procedures and to be able to deliver a vaccine to the EU citizens at a pace never seen before. But despite such speed, we want to reassure you that the recommendations that the European Medicines Agency will give will be based on the same demonstration of the quality, the safety and efficacy as for any other vaccine, and that an authorization will only be granted when the evidence convincingly shows that the benefits of vaccination are greater than any risks. In particular, we want to make clear that the safety requirements for COVID-19 vaccines are the same as for any other vaccine in the EU and will not be lowered in the context of the pandemic. To achieve this, we are making use, as you heard before, of a tool which is called a conditional marketing authorization, which we believe is the most appropriate regulatory mechanism to grant all EU citizens access to a vaccine. It is a marketing authorization with all the safeguards and controls in place, one which includes all the essential elements to ensure a high level of protection in citizens during the course of a mass vaccination campaign. I would also like to reiterate our commitment to the highest level possible of transparency, which we acknowledge in the context of the pandemic is perhaps more relevant than ever. It has been extremely important for us to hear the pertinent views from all the speakers as well as the written comments that we have received. As I said previously, interventions which come directly from those for whom we work are very useful as they inform us and they help us in our task to protect the health of EU citizens. We have to acknowledge, however, despite the fact that we had a long question and answer session, longer than we even expected, but I think we made good use of it, but we still have not been able to take all of the comments and questions at this time. However, we will try to respond to these and address to them as many as we can in writing after the meeting. Nevertheless, all of these testimonies will be shared with the relevant people and committee members so that they can be considered during our work and can be taken on board whenever we take the decision. A recording of this meeting will be published on our website in a few days for the benefit of those who were not able to watch today. And of course, we will also include the presentations, the slide decks that have been given today. In addition, we hope to be able to hold more public meetings in the future to ensure we keep the public updated of our work and our role in this pandemic. As I said before, it is important to build and to maintain the trust, and not only to be transparent, but to engage with you, to listen to the concerns and that you may have, the questions you may have, and to provide assurance about the fact that what we do and where we give our scientific recommendation for the EU, that you can trust. As soon as dates are confirmed in terms of what you would like to plan over the next few weeks, we will of course make this public on our website. With this, I would like to conclude. I want to thank again everyone who has participated, who has contributed internally, and also all of you externally. And I wish you a very nice continuation of the day. Thank you and goodbye.